Ravages. Dragon Rain Book 5. Kit Bladegrave. Chapter 1. Kate. Kate, what are you doing, Kate? I grunted at the noises rattling around in my mind again, and rolled over on the cot. But the voices persisted, as they did every night since I locked Craig and Forrest away in the burnt world. It was for their own good, that was what I told myself every time I closed my eyes, and the voices argued with me until the sun rose again. I was doing this to save them. Kate, fight this, you have to fight it. Stop this madness. Shut up. I screamed and flew out of my cot to splash water on my face. It was chilly from the cool night, and it gave me goosebumps up and down my arms, but the voices stopped immediately, and my shoulders sagged in relief. Today, I needed a clear head. There was much work to be done, and there was very little time to do it before the realms managed to rally a proper defense against me and the plagued army of Cassius and Alice. Well, my army more than theirs. Cassius told me as much time and again, reminding me what he had offered. As soon as we were finished conquering the world and showing them how true Daras were meant to rule, I would finally have what was meant to be mine. A throne, a chance to keep those I loved safe forever. Nothing would ever happen to Craig and Forrest, not on my watch. I was not Celandine. I was not going to sacrifice them for anything. Certainly not for those who didn't deserve to be saved. I saw them for what they were now, saw how traitorous they could become. Soon enough it would be over, and one day, Craig and Forrest would understand why I did what I did. Why I had no choice except to take action, and be what the Vindicar was truly meant to be. Celandine should never have stopped at destroying the orcs. It would have saved us all trouble in the future. This is not you, the voice grew stronger. I yelled, smashing my hands to my ears. You are not a killer of innocents. You know this. Fight it, Kate, fight it and come back to us. No. No, I'm not stopping, not now. You are destroying everything you're meant to be. This is not your destiny, Kate. You're meant to save the realms. A knocking sounded loudly at my door, and the voices cut off again. Catherine? It is time, Cassius called out to me. I held my breath, waiting for the voices to rally once more like they usually did when he was around, but there was silence. Beautiful silence. Catherine? Be right there, I replied, and stared long and hard at my reflection one more time. My blue-green eyes were darker than normal, but I felt stronger, so much stronger now that I understood the truth of the past. So many lies brought us to this point, and I was going to finally set the record straight. Revenge, that's what was important. I slipped into my leather breeches, knee-high black leather boots, blouse with the leather armor over top. I strapped on my 2 leather gauntlets, and pulled my hair back in a thick braid, so it remained out of the way for today's trip. I dropped the sheath crosswise over my body, and slid the executioner into it at my back before I reached for my final weapon, my true weapon of power now. The shield of the Vindicar. This would lead us to victory. My hand trembled as I reached for it, picking up the heavy metal that fit so perfectly on my forearm. The moment I fitted it, the metal warmed my skin even through the leather armor, and the runes on my body glowed a brilliant blue light. No, not blue, you've been infected, Kate. Look at yourself. Truly, look at yourself. Tell me what you see. I faltered as a wave of dizziness hit me. I blinked furiously. Trying to stay upright, I swore I saw the runes shift to red, and when I lifted my gaze to the mirror, caught sight of a pair of black eyes staring back at me. But then the image was gone, and the dizziness passed. Screams sounded in my ears, screams from the past that Cassius had opened my eyes to, and I straightened, certain in what needed to be done. The voice echoed again, but this time much quieter, and I ignored it as I strode toward my door. When I opened it, Cassius was there waiting for me, leaning casually against the far wall, ankles crossed, tossing a dagger end over end in his hand. He bowed his head slightly at the sight of me, and waved his arm forward. Are the troops ready for the siege? I asked as we walked through the halls that were already in the process of being rebuilt. The army of Plagued worked around the clock to build up the old foundations of the original Dara fortress, and in only 2 days the outer walls were halfway complete. I didn't ask how Cassius managed to do so much in so little time. I didn't care. We had the land back, and already, I felt the surge of power flowing up through the ground and into the stones beneath my feet. So much strength. Cassius led the way through the recently dug out part of the fortress I'd originally fallen into, and we climbed up and out of it using the rope ladder. "There is something I wanted to show you before we set out today," he said, and pulled me to the side. "I believe it is time our home saw the light of day again, don't you?" He stepped forward again, held his hands to the ground, and closed his eyes. A rumbling started from deep beneath us. The ground cracked and split, as bit by bit the old fortress ruins burst through the surface, sending me stepping backward to better get my balance as my jaw dropped in awe to see such magic. Cassius didn't even appear strained from the action, as he moved his hands up and brought with them the old halls and corridors of the fortress. No more sleeping underground. Now, when we completed our conquest, we could return home to his place, and the Daras would have their home once again. As the final wall returned to the surface, cracked and losing stones as it settled and finally stopped, the ground ceased its complaints, and the Plagued immediately set to work, swarming the structure to begin the hard job of restoring it, bit by bit. "Incredible," I breathed as Cassius returned to my side. "See what you can do when you know the truth," he replied. "Come, we have plans to go over. In a few days' time, Gregornath will be ours, Vindikar." We left the ruins behind, and made way for the massive war tent set up where not too long ago the entire dragon army had stood, thinking they could fight back against the might of this army. They'd retreated, choosing to fight another day. But now they were holed up in their castle with no way out. Cassius and I saw to that. Our first day here, after the army retreated, Alice took half the soldiers and cut off any chance of escaping the dragon realm, closed any and all portals they could have access to. I mentioned being able to use other magic to escape, but Cassius had a way of blocking that, he told me, and I let it go. Now, everyone was trapped within the walls surrounding the dragon castle we were about to lay siege to. Beneath the tent, I rested my hands on the large, round table covered with a map of the surrounding area, including the immense walls outside the castle. "These won't be easy to get over," I mused, running my hand over them. "Who said anything about going over them?" Cassius nodded, and I joined him at the other end of the tent. "Those are our ticket in. A few hard hits and with your power we'll be through the walls in minutes. That castle will fall today, Catherine, you have my word." I grinned, thinking of those walls tumbling down just like the ones here had done so many years ago when the Daras had nearly been wiped out. Payback finally. "And you will be there to lead us in the charge." "Kaidan," I whispered fiercely, "he ordered the execution of my parents. I should have killed him the first time around, but I was prevented. This time I won't be stopped. He's mine, Cassius. Understand? Mine and no one else's." "If only Forrest had not stopped you," he sighed. "Such a pity, you would already be able to waltz right in and take what's yours." I growled, remembering that scene, having Kaidan in my claws ready to kill him. And those two, they'd gotten in the way. But they were confused, just like I was before I learned the truth. "They'll come around in time. Once both of their fathers are dead, and I present them with their own provinces to rule." Cassius' lip twitched. "You cannot trust them. I have told you this too many times already." "And I told you I'm not going to kill them," I snarled, the runes on my body flaring in warning. He bowed his head, taking a step back. I narrowed my eyes in warning. "You are not to touch them, or I will be ripping your throat out along with our enemies." The shield on my left arm suddenly grew heavy, and I moved back to the table, resting my arm on its surface. Voices whispered through my mind again, but I couldn't hear them, not over the rushing of my blood and the pounding of my heart, as I worked at getting control of my anger again. I didn't need Cassius to tell me I was pushing my luck, letting my rage get the better of me. Too many emotions warred in my mind, and I wanted it all to stop. That one moment, As I'd watched the fire tell the true story of our downfall, everything had been perfectly clear. Everything. But the longer I spent near Cassius, the more my doubts rose, until I couldn't keep anything straight in my head anymore. Kate, you have to listen to us, please, I'm begging you. Don't do something you're only going to regret later. Catherine? Is everything all right? Cassius snapped, and I whipped my head around to glare at him. You seem distracted. It's nothing. Let's get back to planning. I would like to get moving as soon as possible. Of course. As you can see, the easiest route would be to attack the main gate. However, their weakest point in the wall is here, he said, pointing to where the wall butted against the mountain. How does that make it weaker? I asked, brow furrowing. The walls are old. From what Alice and the scouts reported, the only ones that have been rebuilt in recent decades are toward the gate. If we attack the walls here, they will fall, he said firmly, and we will have our way in. I bit my lip, thinking over the plan. Once a small contingent is inside, we have them open the main gates and the army overruns the castle, I said quietly. Cassius beamed at me from across the table. You may not be Celandine, but you certainly think like her. Commander all the way. You were made for this, Catherine, made to lead an army to victory. I nodded, unsure of what else to say. Then we're settled. If we don't stop, it's a full day's ride to reach the castle, he informed me. I'll prepare our troops, and you, Commander, I suggest you take a few moments and prepare your mind for what is to come. He bowed his head again, and left me alone in the tent. I removed the gauntlet from my arm and set it before me, staring at it intently. The shield was the weapon that would help us win this war, just as it was meant to. Lightly I ran my fingers over it, and power sparked from it to my fingers, sending a jolt of warmth through my very core. But something was wrong, it felt odd. Kate, you are not a killer, please listen to me, you have to listen. Get out of my head, I whispered through gritted teeth. But the voices continued, and I hung my head, shutting my eyes to try and drown them out. That voice. I knew it so well, but I didn't want to hear it, not right now. I needed a clear head, needed to be able to go into this fight and come out victorious. For my family. For my parents. No matter how much blood it took, I would right the wrongs done to my clan. As the voices continued to pester me, I growled and pulled the gauntlet back on, tilted my hand slightly and watched the shield spring out in all its dark glory. The time for war had most certainly come. Chapter 2. Kate. The sun was setting by the time the castle came into view, and Cassius threw up his hand to halt us. I half expected him to say we would make camp and start our attack at dawn, but he grinned, and I knew his thoughts were the same as mine. Alice? Position the catapults if you please, quietly. We don't need them knowing what we're doing. As soon as it's dark, move them in range and start the attack, Cassius ordered. Alice bowed his head, then shouted out the order behind him. You, Commander, will remain by my side until the time comes. I absently nodded, staring straight ahead at the castle, knowing who awaited me inside. Forrest's father, a traitor to his own kin. I was anxious to begin, and when Cassius nudged his horse along to follow Alice and the catapults, I followed. The closer we came to the walls, the louder the warning bells rang in my ears, until a headache bloomed on my forehead. I ground my teeth from the incessant noise, the screaming of the people huddled inside, seeing our army on their doorstep. Men shouted orders, and I watched figures scurrying along the walls as others shifted and prepared for a fight. Dragons clung to the wall, digging into the stone with their claws as archers took up their stances between them. No matter, no dragon fire would save them this night. I wasn't sure what I expected since this was my first battle, but the amount of chaos happening around me made time slow down. That I had not expected. Everyone moved but me. I remained perfectly still, atop my horse beside Cassius, waiting. Just waiting. I hardly heard the commands he yelled, or the panicked yells from within the walls anymore. A thundering silence filled my ears, and soon the only sound I heard was my heavy breathing, in and out. In and out. It's time, Cassius' voice suddenly broke through my trance. I turned to see him watching me expectantly. Catherine. Yes, I'm ready, I replied strongly and dismounted as he did the same. We stood back and he raised his hand. Alice waited by the catapults, and the second Cassius' arm dropped, the plague let loose. Screams joined the sounds of stone crashing against stone as the wall took its first round of hits. He'd been right. Parts of the wall were already falling in on itself, and it'd only be a matter of time before it toppled completely, and we could rush in to secure the main gate. Get down. Cassius grabbed me and dragged me to the ground as fire shot over our heads, followed by arrows landing on the ground nearby. The dragons and archers had moved to this side of the wall and were returning fire. Another blast took out 2 of the catapults, and several of the plagued went down, arrows jutting out of their chests and legs, though they didn't stay down, not all of them. I told Cassius there was a potion being created to stop him. Clearly, there was quite a bit of it behind those walls. Cassius was yelling something to me, but I didn't hear him. Fury flooded my veins as my dragon roared, needing to be unleashed. My body shuddered before I twisted and turned, shifting into my dragon form with a roar that shook the very foundations of the wall itself. The runes flared to life, covering my scaled body as I stood back on my hind legs, glaring at the wall and those on it. Arrows ricocheted off my scales, and smoke trailed out my nose as I felt my fire churn hot within me, waiting to be set free. I drew back, pumping my wings hard to pull my body into the air. I circled once, dodging fire from the other dragons as well as the arrows before I opened my jaws and shot a burst of bright blue crackling fire at the wall and those atop it. The stones exploded, and dragons hit the ground hard, their bodies not moving again. Archers jumped, trying to avoid my attack, but I didn't let them. Red filled my vision, and all I saw over and over again was my mom's dead body, hearing my dad's dying roar before he was killed too. Again and again, I attacked until finally the wall cracked right down the center of stones, and silence fell over the battlefield as everyone paused to see the destruction of the wall that had stood for centuries. Now it was nothing but dust and rubble. I landed and let out another fierce roar as the plagued army, led by Alice, broke into action and charged over the debris into the courtyard of the dragon castle. Well done, Cassius commented as I shifted back, already reached for the executioner and opening the shield. Well done indeed. I fear I may have underestimated you. I was about to agree, but we were in the middle of a battle and I itched to dive right in. I didn't wait for him, but took off with the others, fighting my way into the courtyard. Bodies were everywhere, swords clashed, and men screamed. Kate, you can't. Please. The voice disappeared as soon as I attacked my first dragon soldier. And I didn't hear it again for a very long time afterward.
Chapter 3. Craig. What the bloody hell just happened? I bellowed, yanking hard on the bars. The darkness, Celandine whispered forlornly from her cell, sitting on the dirt and straw looking defeated already. It has taken hold deep within her. No, I growled fiercely, feeling my face shift. No, that's not possible. I refused to believe the Kate that stood here and willingly locked us away, the Kate who had come here specifically to fight the darkness on her own to save us, would just give in as she did and let the plague take control. She had left with that bastard to attack the realms, to kill innocent people. What happened to her? Forrest asked. Celandine? Help us understand. I was too busy frantically finding a way to bust out of the cell. I didn't bother looking over at the woman, still working at finding a way to bust out of these bars. I heard her wince in pain as she shifted and finally started talking. I paid attention with one ear as I tried to listen for anything else, half of me praying Kate had been putting on an act for Cassius, and she was making her way back to us as soon as she could get away from him. That had to be it. But the longer I stared at the doors, the more my heart sunk and my gut rolled. Kate wasn't coming back. Cassius, he found a way to drag me from her mind, Celandine told us quietly. I did not even know he was still alive. I thought he had been killed in the battle, but it appears I was wrong. What truth was he talking about? Forrest asked. Celandine blew out a heavy breath, and I couldn't help but turn to stare at her this time. Guilt flitted across her face. She gripped the bars as if needing to hold on to something. You have to understand, everything he showed her, he replaced himself with me as the enemy in those memories. What did he show her, damn it? I snarled. We don't have time for you to hold back, not now. Kate is out there possessed, and we have no idea what she's doing. She's leading the army alongside Cassius, Celandine shot back fiercely, managing to pull herself to her feet. She thinks I'm the reason the darkness came to our land in the first place. She hung her head before she whispered, there is a much darker part of our history that very few know, that the council didn't know about, or at least not how it all started. I exchanged a confused glance with Forrest. What are you talking about? Orcs, what happened to the orcs, she muttered bitterly. And how my brother pushed my father into starting a war with them we could not win, all to convince my father that the only way to save us all from any future attacks was to use magic. Dark magic. Orcs? I shook my head. What are you talking about? They were destroyed by their own actions. No, that's not true at all. That's what the council was made to believe. I don't understand then, what happened? Forrest asked. You're saying all of this, the plague, everything started that long ago. Celandine paced to the back of her cell, then to the bars again. Let me tell you a story, gentlemen, a story that was never meant to be told. By the time Celandine finished speaking, my mind warred with what actually happened that brought the plague here in the first place. It seemed Zohar was always a paranoid dragon, and feared the worst would come for his clan. The orcs posed no immediate threat, but Cassius fueled his paranoia, and though Celandine was his most trusted commander, he refused to listen to her and turned to his son instead. A son bent on acquiring more and more power through dark magic that required sacrifices. He destroyed an entire race, I said, still in disbelief. All that death and suffering, that's what started the plague. What brought it to life? Yes. Thousands were killed, so much blood, so much screaming, Celandine sighed. Those days of battle haunted me for years after. And when Cassius and my father started locking themselves away again, I knew they could not quench their craving for more power. And the only way to get it was to kill more innocents. I choked on my rage, thinking of what Ragnall had been doing as one of the possessed. Killing off villages full of our people for this darkness. How do we stop it? How did it take over Kate? Kate's mind is darker than you believe, she started, but I cut her off, angrily slashing my hand through the air in front of my face. No, it's not possible. Yes, it is. Everyone has a darkness in them, and if they do not find a way to let it out, it can fester and grow. That is what happened. Celandine shrugged as she tilted her head to the side, watching me closely through narrowed eyes that reminded me so much of Kate it made my chest ache. She wanted revenge for what happened to her parents, and that is how it starts. One single moment in a person's life where they consider doing the unthinkable. I wanted to argue that she would never, but then I heard Forrest curse under his breath. What? Back in Gregornath, she nearly killed Caden and Ragnall. That was the moment. She was supposed to be the Vindikar, pure of heart, and ready to fight for the innocent. Not murder the people she blamed for the death of her parents. She wasn't supposed to spill blood like that, and now we had no idea where she was, or how much darker she was making her soul. In a burst of anger, I charged the bars, yanking on them until my arms threatened to tear from their sockets. Forrest was yelling at me to calm down, but I couldn't do that, not now. I had to get out of this cell, had to get to her. I heard a groan and froze as Forrest fell silent. I blinked, then stared at the bars in my hands and smirked. They were bent, just slightly, but it was enough to tell me there was a way out of these cells. Wait, we need a plan before we just bust out of here, Forrest argued quietly. The plan is to get out of here and get to Kate, I snarled and went back to tugging on the bars. We need to know how to save her, if we can save her, he whispered. My hand shot through the part of our cells that joined, grabbing his throat as I growled, feeling my face shift even worse. To his credit, he didn't even flinch as a continuous growl echoed from my throat. Craig, I understand your fury, I do. Do you really think I don't feel the exact same? He said, his voice measured. I heard the unsteadiness of his own raw emotions over the knowledge that after everything we've been through, we might be losing Kate. One by one my fingers peeled away from his throat, and I breathed heavily in and out through my nose until I managed a nod. Celandine, that shield Kate had, that was the shield, wasn't it? Forrest asked. I envied him at that moment for being able to think so clearly, when all I wanted to do was rip this place apart stone by stone with my bare hands, and kill anything that got in my way. No, it was not. What do you mean? I saw the same gauntlet as Forrest on her arm. It has to be. No, Cassius created that shield out of dark magic, twisting the powers of the Vindicar for Kate. It is not the true shield. Her gaze slid upward. The shards, they're still here, and you will need them if you are to save her. And the other shield? I asked, already wrapping my hands back around the bars. It must be broken by her, or she will never be free. I braced myself for how much it was going to take out of me to break through these bars. Be ready for a fight, I warned Forrest, and with a mighty roar, putting everything I had into it. I attacked the bars with only one thing on my mind: get to Kate and save her before she dragged herself too far into the darkness to get her back.
Chapter 4. Forrest. I stared at the bent and crooked bars as Craig slipped out of the cell, sucking in deep gulps of air. He was drenched in sweat, and his arms shook, but he didn't stop to catch his breath before he crept through the dungeon and toward the steps, searching for keys to get me and Celandine out. No guards had come running yet, and I hoped our luck would hold out a bit longer. If we could find the shards and a way out of here without having to take on whatever plague were left behind, we'd have a few needed moments to gather our strength before setting off after Kate. The seconds ticked by, and I grew anxious, waiting for Craig to get back when something heavy thudded down the stairs, groaning in pain. A body rolled into view a second later, followed by Craig jumping over it, keys in hand. "It dead?" I asked as he worked the right key into the lock. No. He shoved the key in the lock, and it grated loudly as he yanked the cell door open. "Take care of him, would you?" "With pleasure," I growled, and as the plague demon was just regaining his feet, I drew on my fire and pulled just enough to set it alight with a puff of air. Its skin ignited immediately, and it screamed as its skin burned away as Craig let Celandine out of her cell next. "How many guards did you see aside from this one?" I asked, kicking the burning body for emphasis and to let out a bit of pent-up anger. Craig raised a brow at my action but said nothing about it. I heard more than I saw. "And the shards?" I asked, turning to Celandine. "Do you know where they are?" "I have an idea. There is a hidden vault within a room off the main hall. If I know my brother at all, they will be there." I threw my head back in an annoyed laugh. Right where they were in the Dara ruins. Kate, she had the other shards with her too. "Think they're there?" "Won't know until we reach the vault, but pray they got left behind," Craig muttered and moved for the stairs. "Come on, let's get moving. We're short on time, and Kate, I'm not sure how long she can hold out." Craig crept up first, and once at the top of the short set of steps leading into the main part of the fortress, he waved for us to follow. "If you are truly worried about Kate, speak to her," Celandine whispered. "I can't," I replied, confused. "We have no way to reach her." She closed her hand around my arm, and a jolt of warmth shot into me as her eyes flared blue just as Kate's did. My mouth fell open, as suddenly she was standing beside me, wearing that look of determination in her eyes, and the smile that drew me in the first time she ran into me. Underneath the raging chaos that were Craig's emotions were mine, striving to be let free. Anger, fear that I would never see her again. That we would be too late. "Kate," I whispered, and as I closed my eyes I reached out, pushing across realms to find her. It wasn't like normal when I reached out for her. The blue light I associated with Kate's mind, her soul, was tainted by shadows. It crept in around my mind as I pushed further, straining to get to her. I urged myself to go past the darkness, needing to see a glimmer of Kate, the one I knew who was willing to fight and maybe even die to protect the innocent. I winced when the loud sounds of battle, screams, and swords clashing together met my ears. There was roaring, so much suffering, and in the midst of it all was the blue light of Kate being strangled by the plague. It hissed when it felt me, lashing out, and before I could do more than whisper her name, it thrust me back, and I slammed into the stone wall, sliding to the floor as Craig gripped my shoulder hard. "What happened? Did you find her?" he asked, an edge of desperation to his words. I held my forehead, wincing at the annoying pain there, and feeling as if the plague had nearly wrapped its tendrils around me and dragged me down too. "Yes," I replied, and met his worried gaze with my own. "We have to hurry." "Shit," he muttered, hauled me to my feet, and before I could say anything, he disappeared around the corner. Shouts and yells of pain echoed back to me and Celandine. By the time we poked our heads around the wall, Craig stood atop a pile of unconscious bodies, holding another plague demon by the throat as the thing kicked and clawed at his grip. Craig grunted and threw the thing into the nearest wall, where it cracked its skull. I flinched at the violent sound, but didn't have long to linger. I set the pile of bodies alight as I passed, then a plague, still trying to find its feet. Celandine jogged after Craig. Wide-eyed, I glanced around at the destruction he'd caused, then rushed to catch up as the two of them disappeared out of sight. I didn't want to lose them in here. Then a body sailed out from the corridor, nearly taking me down. "Let's move, Forrest," Craig bellowed. "Remind me never to piss you off," I muttered when I finally reached his side, where several more plagued were knocked out next to a set of double doors. "Where did this come from?" "With the right motivation," he grunted as he pushed on the doors. They creaked and groaned in protest before finally giving way, and he smirked. "You can do anything. And this is the war room, right?" Celandine nodded. Check the maps on the table," she urged, and we ran into the room scouring the maps. "Gregornath," I breathed. "They're attacking from the Dara lands." I ran my fingers over the hand-drawn battle plans, trying to sense anything of Kate left behind, but the darkness was too strong here, and I growled, smoke flowing out of my nose in annoyance. Craig was already on the other side of the room, breaking through the doors that would lead to the room we found before, where the vault was, hopefully. Each step I took started an anxious feeling in my gut I couldn't shake. I grit my teeth, and my vision almost blurred with worry. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, but I wasn't about to slow down for anything. A voice, deep in the back of my mind, told me we had to get to Kate, but it wasn't just to save her. Someone else was in trouble, other people we cared for. My feet tripped over each other, and I sagged against the wall as images from Malcolm's past flashed through my mind, and I realized it was his voice I heard now, urging me on to succeed where he failed. "Forrest?" Celandine's hand rested on my shoulder, but when I lifted my gaze to hers, there was no doubt on her face she saw Malcolm within me, and it broke her heart the same time it lifted her spirits. She took a shaky breath, then grabbed my hand and pulled me along faster. "Craig. He's found the vault." All I did was nod and let her pull me along, until I spotted Craig standing near the wall, an open section before him. He had already reached in and pulled out his blade and my daggers, stuff that had been on us when we dove through the clouds on our mission to rescue Kate. He reached in further, and I spotted a familiar knapsack in his hands. "The shards?" I asked, wondering why I was still so on edge about something happening. The fortress was so quiet around us. They'd probably taken most of the plagued with them, so what was I feeling? I frowned. "Craig?" He opened the front pouch and sighed in relief. "Shards, they're here, and so is this." When he pulled out the coin Kate used to get here, the anxiety within me nearly exploded. I felt my body shaking. "We have to go right now." "Forrest?" "What's wrong?" He slung the knapsack onto his back, then gripped his sword in his right, holding the coin in his left. I couldn't put it into words, but a rushing filled my ears, and I swore I felt Kate again, but this time she was calling out for us, calling for help. Her voice was faint, and it was only growing quieter the longer we stood there. "I don't know, but we need to go." Craig held the coin flat in his palm, and I stepped closer, resting my hand on his shoulder, and held out my other for Celandine. When she stepped back from us with a sad smile, my heart sank. "No, you have to come with us," Craig urged. I cannot, she said and took another few steps away. Cassius pulled me from Kate's mind using the power from this world. If I leave, I will be lost forever. But if you stay, the plague will find you, I argued. They will, but who says I cannot destroy as many of them as I can before they take me down? She gave us a wicked grin as the first yells of fury rang out in the fortress. Now go, you must save Kate before the darkness takes hold in her permanently. The coin was already glowing in Craig's hand, even as I continued to reach out for Celandine. It was like watching her die all over again, but then we were being thrown through realms and she was gone from our sight. I grabbed hold of Craig's shoulder tighter, as the rushing in my ears turned to screams and roars of dragons. The second my feet hit hard ground and the light faded, I stared slack-jawed at the chaos we landed in the center of. Dragons flew overhead, breathing fire as dark-shadowed beasts attacked them, raining death from the skies. On the ground, dragon soldiers fought against the plague. Smoke filled the air, burning my eyes and down my throat as I hacked and tried to see a clear image of what was happening. There was rubble everywhere, and so much screaming and yelling. We stood in the courtyard of the castle, and panic froze me for a few seconds until two strong hands grabbed hold of me and whipped me around. Forrest. My son, what are you doing here? Caden wrapped his arms around me tightly, but when he set me back on my feet, I took in his bloodied face and clothes, the way he held his left arm oddly, and how his sword was almost limp in his hand. What's happening? I asked as he dragged me toward the steps of the castle. The plague, they're attacking, and they're being led by your Vindikar. What happened? It's a long story, but that's not Kate, I told him, trying to wrap my mind around what was happening. I caught sight of the dead, too many to count scattered around. Why haven't you fled? Why is everyone still here? We can't use the portals, they've cut us off completely, broken through our walls, we have nowhere to run. Half our number are too weak to shift anymore. Craig held up the coin in his hand. Yes, we do. We need to get everyone out of here. And you both are coming with us. I can't, father, not while Kate's here. He grabbed my arm hard and shook me fiercely. No. She is lost, Forrest. There is no saving her, and I will not leave you behind. Craig, Forrest? Another voice yelled, and I whipped around to see Lucy, also covered in blood and grime, sprinting toward us. Her eyes were hard and her face set in anger. I didn't even have to ask if she'd seen Kate or not. I wondered while I took a few seconds to stare at her, what wounds were from today, and which ones came from the attack after we'd left her and the other witches and sorcerers behind. Lucy, we have the coin. We can get everyone out of here, I told her, taking her hand. Help her, Caden ordered, and before I could argue, he dove back into the madness, several of his royal guard at his flanks. I couldn't tear my gaze from him, watching him take on the plagued as they came at him, 2, 3 at a time, all the while searching for any sign of Kate or Cassius. Forrest. We have to go. Craig bellowed. I whirled around, taking after him and Lucy, heading inside. So many people filled the front hall, trailing into corridors and rooms. They clung to each other, fear on their faces and tears streaming down their cheeks. All the sadness and desperation bashed into me, and I held my head in my hands trying to tune them out. Their emotions grew worse until I sank to my knees, cringing and praying for it to stop. Forrest. You have to push through it, man, Craig urged, crouching before me. I can't. I can't think. You don't have a choice. If we don't get them out of here, they're all going to die. Is that what you want? He snapped. Body shuddering with the effort to get control of my emotions and everyone else's around me, I forced myself to breathe and open my eyes. Craig's stare was there to meet me, and he nodded firmly as he pulled me to my feet. My head throbbed and my heart pounded in my chest, but my people needed me. Lucy was already gathering everyone together to get them ready to transport. They needed me right now. Needed their prince. I repeated the words over and over again, and the mantra kept their emotions from overwhelming me, for now at least. As I was turning to gather more people into the hall, I felt as if a hand reached out and brushed against my cheek, a light touch. Kate. I glanced over my shoulder. She was close, so close. "We're going to save you," I told her, hoping somehow she'd hear me. Chapter 5. Forrest. I watched as Lucy disappeared with the final group of people needing to escape Gregornath, while the battle continued to rage on outside. Our forces had been pushed back to the steps, and Kate was out there somewhere, fighting against those she was meant to protect. Not much time had passed in reality, but in my mind it felt like a lifetime, waiting for our chance to go out there and find her. We had no plan, nothing at all, except to knock her out and drag her back with us, like we planned to do before she was possessed by the plague. The screaming had grown less, and I hadn't heard the roar of a dragon in some time. My home, the place I was meant to rule over one day, had fallen in a single day to this plagued army. I never thought it possible, and yet here we were. Lucy came back to us, and the only ones left to evacuate were those still fighting outside. I had no idea how we were going to get them away, unless we dove into the fight. I met Craig's gaze, and he nodded firmly before he charged toward the front beside me, our weapons in hand, ready to attack. My father and the others were fighting in a half circle, doing their best to keep the enemy back, but they were losing ground quickly. Craig and I started at one side, shoving soldiers back toward Lucy and yelling at them to retreat, even as we held off the attackers. Fighting hand to hand wouldn't help us, and Caden was in danger of being overwhelmed. "Get them back," I yelled to Craig, throwing my head back as I shifted. The others had grown tired, too weak to hold their form, but I was fresh into the fight and my fire was ready to burn. Plague screamed as they caught fire, and it burned through their lines, killing them. Wave after wave came at us, but I pushed them back as Craig dragged the soldiers out of harm's way, shoving them toward Lucy. I backed up farther and farther, not seeing anything anymore. The shrieking of the dying enemy was all I needed to hear, to know we were going to get out of this. We were going to make it. All we had to do was get my father inside, then snatch up Kate. We'd figure it out once we were away from here. I heard Craig yelling behind me, but I couldn't stop the attack, not yet. Then I heard it. A yell of pain that sounded far too familiar. I snapped my jaws shut, and through the smoke and haziness in the air, I spied my father on his knees with a sword to his throat. Cassius held the blade, but it was the person who stood beside them that had my claws digging through the courtyard stone as a snarl escaped my throat. "If you wish him to live," Cassius yelled, "shift back, Prince Forrest." Reluctantly, I forced my dragon to retreat and stood with Craig at my side, glaring at the man who held my father's life in his hands. "Let him go. We'll leave and you can have Gregornath," I shouted. "Seems like a reasonable offer," Cassius said with a shrug. "But I'm afraid I want so much more than that." "You two were supposed to stay out of this," Kate snapped. Her eyes were almost solid black, but when I reached out, searching for a trail of emotions that would tell me how she truly felt, I sensed it, just a hint. "Kate." I nudged Craig to try and give him hope. The Kate we knew was still in there somewhere. We just had to get her out. "Kate, please," I begged. "Why are you doing this?" "I have told you why. Everything we knew was a lie." "He's using you," I told her, taking a half step closer. "He's using you and your power to get what he wants." "That truth he told you?" "It's not true. He's twisted your mind. Please, listen to me. Come back to us." She closed her eyes, wincing, and seemed unsteady on her feet. Her lips moved, but whatever she said I couldn't hear. "I have to do this," she hissed furiously. "I have no choice." "Yes, you do." I held out my hand for her. "You can come back to us, please. This isn't you. You're not a killer. You're not his puppet. You are supposed to fight with us to stop this, not join it. Kate, look at me, really look at me, at us." Slowly she lifted her head and her gaze locked onto Craig as he nodded slowly, before she looked at me next. The darkness started to recede, and more of the blue-green of her irises shone through as the runes on her body, glowing red, warred with the light. I willed her to fight it, to make this right, and chanced to look at Caden. He only had eyes for me, and I knew exactly what he was going to do a second before he moved. No. I yelled and tried to lunge forward. My father grabbed for the blade at his throat and yanked Cassius over his shoulder, throwing him to the stones. He kicked Alice hard in the chest as he charged in, and all the while, Kate stood by watching the spectacle unfold. Her feet started to move, but she seemed to be at odds with herself and remained planted. Caden was almost to us, but then he tore a blade from the hands of a dead plague and turned on Cassius. The others moved in closer, and I was about to charge in, but Craig grabbed me and yanked me back. Let me go to him. I fought against Craig, but he held me too tightly. Let me go. You can't. You'll be overwhelmed. I watched as Caden's blade slashed through the air, nearly taking down Cassius once, twice, but then the air grew heavy with magic, and dark tendrils of shadow burst out of the stones. I expected it to be coming from Alice, but a bright red flash caught my eye. Kate held out her hand, executioner sheathed at her back, and her eyes were solid black once again. The shadows shot out and grabbed my father at his ankles and his wrists, dragging him to the ground once again. An evil smirk I never thought would grace her lips met my stunned gaze, but then Cassius stalked toward my father, and just as he opened his mouth to call out to me, a blade was plunged through his chest. No. I bellowed and ranted, my heart shattering as I watched my father suck in air, gasping for breath as blood seeped from the wound. His eyes darkened, and his body started to sag forward, held upright only by the shadows. No. You bastard. I'll kill you. I'll tear you apart. Craig picked me up in his arms and dragged me back into the hall as Cassius yelled for a charge. But Lucy was waiting for us, and 1 second I was staring at the horror that was my dead father, and the next I was sinking to my knees, surrounded by those we rescued in the courtyard at Boshen. Where is Caden? A familiar voice asked overhead. Drake, I thought, or Tristan. I couldn't bring myself to answer, and heard Craig do it for me. The Dragon King Caden is dead, he called out before his hand fell heavy on my shoulder. Long live King Forrest. Dead, my father was dead. And it was all Kate's doing.
Chapter 6. Kate. The second Forrest and Craig disappeared from my sight, I released the shadows holding Caden's body and sent them flying after Cassius. They wrapped around his body and dragged him back to me, forcing him to his knees. Executioner was in my hands in a blink, and I pressed the blade to his throat as I growled. What did you just do? He glared at me, and I tilted my head, sending another tendril of darkness to choke him. He sputtered and gasped for air as I watched, the blade still hovering dangerously close to his neck. A neck I could so easily cut through and relieve him of his head. You're not in charge, a voice warned in my head, and I gave myself a little shake. Of course I was. I had the power. I was the one running this show, but even as I held Cassius in my grasp, he managed a tiny smirk. The shadows started to pull back, and then he was free. I held the blade out toward him, taking a few cautious steps back as he straightened his leather coat and smoothed back his ruffled hair. You wanted your revenge, did you not? I did, I said quietly. And this is part of that revenge. He motioned to the body of Caden behind him, eyes wide open, lying in a pool of blood. Or have you changed your mind? Craig and Forrest, they came here for you. You must fight. Catherine, look at me, Cassius demanded, and my gaze shot to his against my will. But even as he stared me down, that voice lingered in the back of my mind. Craig and Forrest escaped the cells I placed them in. They fought to get to me. They got away, which meant there was a chance I would see them again, a chance I would be saved. Growling in annoyance, I sheathed my sword and grunted. I wanted to do it. Cassius seemed happy enough with my answer, and either ignored the confusion I knew had to be on my face, or was sure I would continue on this dark path. And I wanted to, I had to. There was no going back, not now that we killed Caden, Dragon King. I circled his body as the plague swarmed through the castle, searching for anyone left behind, but I knew it would be empty. Mama Lucy, she had been here too. She would never leave a soul in trouble. An ache started in my chest, and I rubbed at it annoyed, seeing her face beaten and bloodied. We will secure the castle, Cassius said as he joined me by my side. Once we regroup, we will make our plans. His hand brushed across my hand and I jerked to a stop, a flare of hatred striking me hard. Forrest, he'd killed so many of our men, and for what? To protect these traitorous monsters. And Craig, he helped them escape. They were both to blame for why this victory was not as complete as it should be. I meant for them to stay safely away from this conflict, and now they were in the middle of it. Trying to stop me from making this world our own. I wanted them by my side when this was all over, but what they did to me, it was too much. Cassius brushed my hand a second time, and fury pumped through my veins as I screamed out orders for them to clear the dead. Find them, I bellowed. Find them so we can finish what they started. There's the commander, Cassius whispered. Do not let them cloud your purpose, Catherine. Do not let them sway you from your true destiny. Remember all I showed you. I smiled along with him. I remember, I promised as I stalked into the castle. Don't worry. Screams of the dying filled my ears as I entered the castle. For my first battle, I like to think it went well enough. We broke through their defenses easily enough, captured their castle, and their king now lay dead in the courtyard. Dead. Just like my dad, my mom, and all the other Daras they killed for no reason other than who they were. Kaden might be gone, but there were so many more to seek out. I could feel it, the evil in this realm and seeping into the others. One by one they would fall to our might. There would be no resisting, unless they wanted to die. I paced impatiently around and around the great hall, the place I had been before. The place I should have taken my revenge when I had the chance. You don't want this. You can stop this right now. I growled at the voice, and sank to the throne that would no longer hold a king. I glared at those around me, watching plagued rushing around to do the bidding of their masters. Alice and Cassius stepped into the room, speaking quietly to one another, but I didn't care what they said. Peace and quiet, that was what I needed. I felt jittery, and when I glanced down at my hands, froze to see the dark, sticky residue I hadn't even noticed before. Catherine, why don't you go and rest? Cassius suggested. It will be a few hours before we are ready to move out again. Yeah, sure, I mumbled and pushed out of the chair, muttered something about finding a decent room, and disappeared deeper into the castle. I vaguely knew where Forrest's old room was. He'd told us during the few nights we hung out in this realm after convincing his father to aid us. His dead father, thanks to you. Shut up, I snarled, digging my nails into my palms to try and get a grip on myself. I eventually found myself standing outside a door, my palms throbbing in pain and bleeding from my nails, but at least the voice had stopped again. I did nothing wrong. I was only doing what should have been done years ago, nothing more. I pushed open the doors in front of me and stepped inside. Forrest, I whispered, staring around the chamber. It was nothing like the room I'd grown up in. No, he had been a prince, had a chance to grow up in the world that I should have been in all this time. Tapestries depicting great battles of his clan covered the walls, while thick furs lay on the floor. There was a table at the far side, overlooking a balcony. A massive bed filled another corner, and across from it sat a dark wood wardrobe. I closed the door behind me, and threw the bolt in place for good measure. Not that I expected anyone to be stupid enough to come back and try to attack me, but I was in no mood to have Alice or Cassius appear in here either. Absently, I ran my fingers along the desk and the stacks of papers there. Orders and other issues needing the prince's attention. Well, king now since Kadon was dead. A sharp jolt shot through me, but I grit my teeth and shoved it away, tossing the blade and my shield folded back into the gauntlet on the bed. You just need to rest, I told myself as I kicked out of my boots next and spotted the wash basin and mirror by the bed. Sleep, that'll make everything better. Today was just the first day, and it was hard. I froze when I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. Blood and dirt splattered my face, and I hadn't even noticed. It was in my hair, and as I held up my hand to start wiping it away, they were covered in it. I yelped in alarm as more dripped from my fingers and pooled on the floor. The quiet thud of each drop was like another punch to my gut. Drip. 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 I shut my eyes and shoved my hands in the cold water, willing it to go away. There hadn't been that much blood, I knew there hadn't been. Please be gone, I whispered under my breath, heart hammering away and body trembling all over. Carefully, I opened my right eye, then the left, and though the water was dirty, it wasn't bright red like I expected it to be. My hands weren't smothered in it, and I sagged in relief against the table. But the moment was short-lived when I lifted my gaze. My jaw dropped as I stared at the horrible reflection looking back at me. My eyes, they were solid black. I tried to break away, but the darkness held me in that gaze. It felt like a hand was squeezing my throat, cutting off my air. I gasped for breath, but there was nothing there. Just pain. Those eyes, they couldn't be mine. Cassius weren't. The army we used, they were plagued, but not us. He swore to me we would destroy the army once we took back what was ours. I blinked and finally the grip around my throat vanished, and I sucked in air, coughing and hacking as I tried to catch my breath. When I looked up this time, my eyes were back to normal, but I backed a hasty retreat and climbed onto the bed, shoving my weapons to the foot of it. I curled up in a ball, yanking the covers over my head like I used to do when I was a kid, and wished for the world to start making sense again.
Chapter 7. Craig. Sire. Sire. There was a shuffle of feet, and I heard more murmuring. Craig? I glanced up from the table to see Luca, Nora, and a few others staring at me intently. Tristan had a small smile on his face, and Lucy was giving me another sympathetic look that I had gotten used to these past few days. Sorry, not used to that title yet. Understandable, Luca told me. But I'm afraid you're going to have to at some point. At some point. I wished it could be never. Though I was happy Ragnall was no longer around to try and kill me or make my life miserable, being king of the demons was not part of my plans. Reginald and half the demon council were against my taking over, until we started sending refugees through, and they realized that everything I'd been telling them all these years was real. That Ragnall had been possessed by the darkness himself. It barely took an hour to figure out who else had been taken over, and I executed 5 more commanders, also taken over by the plague. Reginald sadly had not been and was still alive. Despite his hatred of me still, I couldn't complain. He helped get the injured aid, and was leading patrols along the breach every 6 hours. All other portals had been shut down save for one, monitored by Lucy and Grayson. For 3 days we'd been in Boshan, and there'd been no time to stop and take a breath. I still had no idea what happened at the Sorcerer's Manor, but sadly, that was the least of our problems. Cassius and Kate controlled the seat of power in Gregornath, giving them access to a wealth of old magic. The capital of each realm wasn't where it was located, just for the hell of it. Each realm contained its own source of magic, and right now, Cassius was tapping into all the magic of that world. I rubbed my forehead, where a persistent headache refused to leave me alone, and glared at the table. What of our defenses here? We have plenty of men to guard the wall, Tristan stated, pointing to the place on the map. But if their army is as big as you say, the moment they're through, we'll be overrun. I could call in my troops. No, I told him, shaking my head. We can't risk having all our soldiers in one place, not yet. You're really going to try and stop them here? With the number of soldiers you have? Tristan asked and let out a whistle. You're braver than I am. Not braver, but I'm not giving up on Kate, not yet. She is the only way to end this war. I glanced around the chamber that had once been Ragnall's haven in this castle, where he plotted every decision he ever made that led to where we were now. Or at least the possessed part of him had. A very small part of me wished I could remember more about him before he turned, but there was no going back. He was dead, and the burden of saving our kin fell to me. Just as the dragons would now have to look to Forrest to save them. If he ever left his damned room. What are you hoping to do? Luca asked. You said it yourself, the plague has a deep hold on her. She's the reason why King Kadon was killed. I will not let you risk your life either to bring her back, not if it's a lost cause. It was odd for me to hear these demons so intent on keeping me safe, after so many years of my fighting for survival under this very roof. I didn't think I'd ever get used to it. I appreciate your concerns, Luca, but Kate is the Vindicar. Right now she's being controlled by the plague, but we can get her back, Forrest and I. We don't have a choice. I tapped my fingers on a drawing I'd made of the shield, what I could remember at least. This right here is what gives her that power. But she has a shield already. Tristan said, confused. No, that shield is made of dark magic, magic driven by sacrifices made in blood. This one, I said, tapping the drawing again, this is the one she needs to destroy Cassius and all his plagued. Several skeptical pairs of eyes watched me, but I was not going to give up on Kate, not now when she was at her darkest moment. She needed me, needed us, but the people in this room weren't the only ones I needed to convince. We will discuss more of this later. For now, keep an eye out and ensure everyone is safe. Tristan, I would like to move the wounded and innocent to your realm if possible, I told him. If the worst should happen, I don't want them getting caught in the crossfire. Of course, I will see to it. Then that's all for now, thank you, I said, hoping I didn't sound as uncertain as I felt. Leading, not something I wanted to be doing. I came into this thinking I would find the shards of the shield, and then I became the protector of the Vindicar, of Kate. Now I was the bloody demon king waging a war against the plagued, while said Vindicar was trapped by the plague in her own mind. I leaned heavily on the table, remembering how horrible it was to see Kate's eyes black, the runes on her body glowing red. She was so different, but she was still in there. I saw it when Kadun had been killed. She would have kept him alive, but Cassius, he was the one we needed to kill. I needed to lie down and get a few hours of sleep, but Lucy was still in the doorway speaking quietly with Grayson. Lucy, can you stay a moment? Grayson bowed his head, a grim look on his face, and left her with me. What happened after we left? I asked her. And where is Crane? I'd noticed he was missing, but there'd be no time to slow down yet. Too many people depending on me to figure this out. Keep them safe. When the portal opened, she said quietly, what came through? I've never felt such evil before. She closed her eyes, her hands shook. I guided her back to the table, and we sat down. Take your time. She smiled as he rested back in her chair. You are going to be a great king, Craig. I hope you know that. I shrugged. I'll do my best. You've already done more than enough. I knew she was avoiding telling me that whatever attacked them scarred her deeply. Lucy. Her eyes darkened, and I could tell she was no longer seeing this room or me. It killed Crane, she whispered. Killed him so quickly with those tendrils of shadow. I've never seen anything like, there was no stopping it once started. But the portal, I thought you closed it. We did, but it remained, and it killed everyone it touched. So few of us made it out, and the screaming, the shrieking sounds it made. She trailed off and shook her head hard. I'm sorry, I don't think I can tell you any more, not yet. Is it still there? She shrugged. I don't know. We sealed off the dimension, and it didn't follow us through. I cursed, adding another item to my list of growing worries. Get some rest, Lucy, and thank you and your coven for everything you've been doing. I hear we have quite the store of potion now. Yes, enough for every soldier in Boshan. Had we more time, there might have been enough for those in Gregornath. We both sunk into our seats, thinking of all the dead lying there. I glanced upward in the general direction of where Forrest had taken up residence. His people needed him, and he was letting his sadness tear him apart. His father was dead, and it was horrible, but he could not simply lock himself away and leave us all to push forward without him. He needs time, Lucy told me quietly. I pushed to my feet. No, what he needs is to understand the truth, I growled. He blames Kate, she reminded me. I don't know if he'll be willing to try and save her like you are. And you? Do you blame Kate? I asked hotly, quickly losing grip on my temper. I'd kept in check for days, as first Forrest, and then others rallied against the idea of saving her. They said she was a lost cause, and she deserved to die along with the rest of those who attacked Gregornath. No final decision had been made yet, mostly because Forrest ranted his piece and then disappeared. We could reach Kate if we tried hard enough, we just had to be willing to try. Both of us. He could be angry with her all he wanted, but I could not stand by while he ranted about making her suffer for what happened to Caden. I don't, Lucy finally replied. But with the power that's within her, if she is not stopped, if she can't be brought back to us, there may be no other choice but to kill her, Craig. I tried to swallow, but the lump in my throat wouldn't let me, and I stormed out of the room instead. Every demon I passed bowed their head at my passing, and I barely managed to nod in return. I grew up in these halls, and being back here brought up memories I'd once found painful. None of that mattered, not anymore. Not after everything I'd lost, and everything I was about to lose. I stomped up the 3 flights of stairs, turned right at the top, and stalked toward the guest chambers. When I reached the end of the corridor and the double wooden doors, I took a deep breath in through my nose, not that it did anything. Forrest! I bellowed and pounded my fist against the door. Open up right now. We need to talk. A growl was the only reply I received. I will bust down this bloody door if you don't open it. I warned. You can't hide in there forever. There's a war going on in case you'd forgotten, and your people need you. Get your ass over here and open the door. A louder growl echoed in the chamber, and I cursed, dodging to the side a second before the doors exploded with a burst of dragon fire. Splinters of wood fell over my head and shoulders, smoke rising up from the singed hole where the doors had been a second before. There, now they're open. Happy? Forrest snarled from inside. Leave me alone. I brushed wood and dust from my shoulders, growling as my face shifted. 3 demons rushed forward, alarmed, but I waved them off. They eyed the hole in the doors warily before they bowed their heads and retreated down the hall. They remained inside at least, just in case. I appreciated it, considering Forrest was clearly not himself. Feel better? I snapped as I shoved open what remained of the doors, and they crumbled to the floor. You're fixing these doors, by the way. Whatever you say, Your Highness, he spat from his place near the balcony doors. They were thrown wide open, and he had his back to me, his shoulders tense and smoke rising up from over his shoulder. I planted my hands on my hips and glared at his back, waiting for him to turn around and face me. But he didn't. He just stood there, wearing the same dirty and battle-worn clothes as the day we arrived. The room was destroyed, burnt pieces of broken furniture littered it, and several of the tapestries had been torn apart. I hadn't realized his dragon could fit in this room, but noticed several cracks in the stone ceiling and walls, which indicated that he barely fit, but it had been enough for him to get into a full-blown rage. Fire was the only thing he could do in his human form, though it wasn't as powerful as if he was his full dragon form. If he'd shot the door like that, it would have taken out half the corridor. I'm not going to let you sulk up here forever, I grunted. Why the hell not? There's no point, and you know it. No point? Your people need you, or did you forget about them? That got him to whip around and glare at me through narrowed eyes. Don't you dare. Oh, I'm going to dare you, pathetic bastard. It was a low blow, but if he was going to pull this shit, then I was going to push him until he was angry enough to do something, hopefully, leave this room. I wasn't about to stop now. Your father was killed, and it's terrible, but this is not the time to mourn. Your people, what's left of them, are lost and confused right now. They're suffering just as much as you are, and what do? You sit up here and hide. You do nothing to help them. He took a hard step toward me, his hands curling into tight fists at his sides. Don't, he repeated, the word more of a gasp. Maybe you shouldn't be king, if you're not ready to do what's necessary. He roared in fury, and was across the room with his arm pressing into my throat before I had a chance to blink. He slammed me into the wall and lifted me off my feet. My guards came rushing in, yelling for Forrest to release me, but I gasped for them to not attack. Any reaction from Forrest was better than no reaction at this point. I could take his anger, I hoped. Kate is the reason my father is dead, he bellowed. She held him there while that bastard killed him. My father is gone, my lands are gone because of her. Do not tell me I'm not ready to do what's necessary. The dark glint in his eyes was not one I'd seen before, and my gut clenched. Forrest, she's not herself. You know this. No. She made her choice. She left us, he ranted, and his arm pressed harder against my neck, cutting off my air. I gasped, clawing at his arm, but he didn't seem to notice or care. She left us for that damn world. For him. She chose to let the darkness in, and look where we are now. Gregornath has fallen and my people have nowhere to go. I managed to kick him in the gut, and his arm loosened enough for me to slip away from it. I decked him when he came at me again, and he flew backward, landing hard on his back. I rubbed my sore neck as I stalked closer, glaring down at him. She didn't choose anything. You heard Celandine. Everything's been twisted in her reality. She thinks she's saving us all. He jumped back to his feet, and his fists were flying toward my face. I ducked under a few hits, but he clocked me in the jaw, stunning me. I shook off the hit in time for another one to land before I grunted and rushed him, tackling him to the floor. We have to save her. I argued hotly. No, we don't. She's not here anymore, Craig, don't you get it? She's gone. Our Kate is gone. All the fight suddenly went out of him, and he laid there, limp on the floor, sadness warring with anger in his green eyes. I backed off him, shaking my head. She is, Craig, you have to admit it. We lost her. No, I whispered. No, she's still in there. We can save her. Don't you get it? I can't feel her, he yelled so loudly it made me take another step back. I reached out to her, and you know what I felt? Nothing but darkness. The second Cassius killed my father, the second she helped him do that, she was lost to us. He clambered unsteadily to his feet, blood dripping from his nose and a split lip I'd given him. Kate is nothing more than another pawn in his army. He looked so sure of what he said, but I kept shaking my head. I was not going to agree with him, not even close. You're wrong, I growled as I backed toward the door. No, I'm not, he replied calmly. And deep down, you know it. Deep down I know I'm not going to just give up on her because of one setback. A setback? That's what you're calling this. He threw his arms wide. Look around you, Craig. War is here, and she brought it to us. How long until they come to Boshan and do the exact same thing to your home, huh? How long before she kills someone you love? And that right there was the problem. The only one I cared about, the one that had my heart since she dragged my sorry ass to Luce's home to save my life, was possessed by the plague. Forrest had loved her in his own way, but it was not as strong as what I felt for her. I loved her, and the last thing I was going to do was turn my back on her when she needed me most. Your people are looking for you to lead them, I said lamely as I reached the doorway. I suggest you rally yourself and go aid them any way you can. Craig, he called out as I turned my back on him. You have to be ready to make the tough choice. My steps paused for barely a second before I hurried away, not stopping until I reached the privacy of my old chambers. I closed and locked the door, resting against it. I knew exactly what he meant by those last words. Was I really just in denial about all of this? Kate, please, for the love of the gods, you have to break through, I whispered in my mind, doubting she would actually hear me, or could at this point. Please don't make me kill you. The idea of me or Forrest plunging a sword through her ripped me apart, and I sank to the floor, holding my head in my hands. Chapter 8. Craig. I jerked awake, still on the floor in my chambers, as a loud knock sounded at my door. Sire? The council has gathered again and requests your presence. Rubbing a hand down my face, I said I would be right out. My mind was fuzzy, struggling to separate reality from my nightmares. Seeing Kate bearing that shield, using it to kill everyone in sight, to kill Forrest and me. All I saw were those black eyes, and when I found my feet, walking to the wash basin to splash water on my face, a nagging voice in the back of my mind started to agree with Forrest. What if we'd been wrong all along? What if Kate was not destined to be the Vindicar, but this path she was on now was her true fate? To start a war to end all wars and destroy the realms? No, I growled at my reflection angrily. It's not true, and you know it. But did I? Not willing to spend another second arguing with myself, I changed clothes quickly and hurried for my chambers, the 2 guards at my door following close behind. In times of war, I'd almost forgotten 2 guards always followed the king around, something else I was not sure I'd ever get used to. When I entered the council chamber, it was filled with each member and Forrest. He barely looked at me as I entered and took my seat. What news do we have? I asked to get the gathering started. But no one said a word. I started to get uneasy when Forrest cleared his throat and spoke. We have no news, but I've requested everyone here to discuss a more important matter. And that would be? I asked hesitantly. His gaze locked onto mine as he said, the fate of Catherine Dara. No, I growled, shooting to my feet. No, I refuse to discuss this. You don't have a choice, Drake said gently. She has put everyone at risk, and she must be dealt with. I ran a hand through my hair, pacing away from the table. If we're able to capture her, Forrest said, we needed to decide what will be done with her. We'll save her, I snarled, whirling around on them all. There's no other option. And if she can't be saved, what then? He shot back. We keep her prisoner and hope she doesn't escape. Doesn't come after anyone else we care about. I am not willing to take that risk. We're voting right now. I growled in warning, but no one spoke up to stop him. All in favor of killing Catherine Dara for crimes committed against the realms, raise your hand, Forrest stated, and lifted his hand into the air without hesitation. I watched in horror as everyone else at the table, aside from myself, Lucy and Tristan, raised their hands with Forrest. 3 against the rest. My heart plummeted, and the room spun around me. Just like that, they were going to kill her. I'm sorry, Craig, Forrest murmured as he lowered his hand. But this is how it has to be. I'm sorry you see it that way. Sorry all of you do, but I am not going to give up on her, not yet. There's no way to bring her back. Forrest yelled as I stormed out the door. Craig. But I ignored him, walking until I found myself outside, then kept on walking, out the front gate and into the open fields that surrounded the castle. I couldn't do it, I wouldn't. And I wasn't going to let anyone else hurt her either. Out of the 3 of us, I always assumed it would be Forrest who would keep the faith and make sure we all stayed on track. And now, here I was ready to strangle him, because he'd let his anger and sorrow get in the way. The key to saving Kate had to lie within the shards we had. Somehow, they would bring her back. It was either that or watch her be killed.
Chapter 9. Kate. I pressed my palm flat against the glass, unsure of what I was even staring at anymore. It was the middle of the night, but the stars were blacked out as was the moon. The darkness was absolute, just as Cassius promised it would be, washing away the sins of this world and those who inhabited it for too long, who controlled power they should never have had in the first place. My hand dropped back into my lap, and I rested my forehead against the chilly stone, wishing I could sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw them over and over again, Craig and Forrest. Saw their faces when Cassius killed Caden. Saw what I'd done to help that along. You are not a killer, Kate. Be quiet, I whispered, wondering how much longer I could keep up this fight inside my head. Everything was so confusing, and I couldn't bear to look at my reflection anymore. I swore when I did, there was a pair of black eyes staring back at me. Eyes that were not mine. You let the darkness in. Cassius is lying to you, he's manipulated the truth. See it, look past the lies or you're going to get them killed. I scrunched my eyes shut, shaking my head. No, I know what I'm doing. Do you? Why did you lock them up? Do you even remember why you went there in the first place? Get out of my head, I snarled, pacing frantically around what used to be Forrest chambers. No, not until you remember what really happened. Think, Kate, why would you need an army of plague? Look what you're doing to everyone around you. I passed by the mirror again, and when I forced myself to look, a pair of black eyes stared back at me. No, this wasn't right. I tried to move away, but that gaze held me, my feet frozen in place as the past few days whirled around and around in my mind. Images, flashes of fighting, of Cassius telling me his story. Something was wrong, something was very wrong, but I couldn't see it. Couldn't understand. Forrest and Craig, they'd come after me, because I had left them. To save them, I whispered, to save everyone from the darkness. I grabbed my head as a horrible pain exploded, and I fell into the cabinet under the mirror. Screams filled my ears, and I realized they were mine as I shrieked in agony. My dragon roared to life within my mind, and I flinched to see her darkened scales instead of the blue ones she should have borne. And my arms. The runes were red. What have I done? I whispered in horror through the pain, falling to my knees. Forrest. I'm so sorry, I whispered to the night. So sorry. I remembered Cassius drawing Celandine out of my mind, and what he told me afterward. I'd known then he was lying, but the darkness, it found its way in, and it took root. All because I'd wanted revenge against those who murdered my parents. But Caden, he hadn't killed my dad. I knew that now. Everything became clear in an instant. Alice, I growled. His voice, I'd heard it before, that night when my dad was killed, he'd been there. Fight it, Kate. Fight it. I pushed back against the darkness flowing through my veins, but it clung hard, wrapping itself tightly around my soul. I sensed my dragon straining to break free as I pulled myself back up and glared at my reflection. My black eyes were slowly lightening, and bit by bit, the green started to return as I managed to get hold of who I was, who I really was. Everything that happened since getting to the burnt world had been an illusion, and I'd fallen for it. I'd let myself be taken in. I was an idiot, and now I didn't deserve to have anyone save me. I had to get to them. Had to get out of here, and get to Forrest and Craig. I grimaced, thinking of how much Forrest must hate me right now, but he had every right to. I couldn't bring Caden back, but I was not going to let Cassius win. I let my connection to them fill me, remembering their smiles and their laughs, holding their hands. The moments we shared together. I had come here to save them. I was not going to give up on that goal just yet. Just as the first bits of shadow broke free of my mind, letting me begin to really understand what was happening, my door burst open. Well, Cassius snarled, Alice right behind him, I'd hoped it would have taken longer for you to realize the truth. He nodded, and Alice rushed in, grabbing me by the arms from behind and forcing me to face my true enemy. Such a pity you make me do this. It truly is. Things work out for the better when you just accept the inevitable. I tugged on my arms, but the fight inside my mind weakened me. You will not win this fight, I warned with a smirk. You can't keep a hold on me forever. It doesn't have to be forever, just long enough to kill the rest of those you care for. Craig and Forrest. Pulse pounding in my ears, I growled at him fiercely. What are you talking about? It's quite obvious, isn't it? The darkness seeks out the tiniest bit of anger and hatred within a person. It feeds on it, he explained, walking around me in a slow circle. The death of your parents had been enough to get it started, but if Forrest and Craig are dead, if you watch them die, it won't stop the plague from claiming you completely. It will ensure that it does. I grunted, still trying to break free. It won't happen. I won't let you hurt them. Who said you had a choice? I'm awake now, I know what's happening. You lied to me, you used me. Yes, I did, he sighed. And now, I'm going to do it all over again. His hand flattened against my forehead, and I screamed as it felt like a bolt of ice shot through my veins. I jerked and twitched, desperate to fight back, but even my dragon mournfully roared as the darkness rushed right back in. My mind became fuzzy and my body sagged in Alice's arms. Forrest and Craig. I had to remember them. Catherine? I blinked, shaking out my head as the remnants of a headache left me. Cassius? I glanced over my shoulder. Alice? What's going on? Alice released my arms and steadied me on my feet. I was dizzy, and he helped me to a chair to sit. There was an incident. A few of the dragon soldiers returned to try and get to you. You were hit on the head during the attack, and they escaped. I guess that sounded right. Who led them here? Cassius cleared his throat loudly as he crouched before my chair. Craig, I'm afraid. He was very intent on getting to you. I heard him say they were here to finish this before it went any further. His words took a few minutes to kick in. They were here to kill me. I'm afraid so, Catherine. I'm afraid so. Fury boiled through me. I was doing this for them, to try and keep them safe, and they came here to kill me? My heart rebelled at the idea, but my mind said it wasn't so hard to believe. They were just like the rest. When do we leave? I demanded. A few more days. We're still ensuring our hold on Gregornath will remain once we move on, Cassius explained. Are you sure you're all right? No, I growled. No, I won't be all right until they join the rest. Cassius held out his hand to me, and together we stood. That's my commander, he mused with a dark smile. Come, we have much planning to finish before he makes for Boshan. Boshan, where the demons dwelled and where they would all meet their end. This army of ours would only grow bigger once the plague took hold of the dead left behind. Soon enough, Boshan would fall to our might too, and Forrest and Craig, they would have very little time to regret turning against me before I killed them too.
Chapter 10. Forrest. I picked up the last large piece that remained of the doors, and chucked it into the pile out in the corridor. I could have easily hurt Craig, killed him, but I was too wrapped up in my grief to notice if he held it against me or not. The vote to end Kate's life, that I knew he was ready to throttle me over. But what choice did we have? He saw her the same as I did, standing there in the courtyard beside Cassius. She was the reason the wall collapsed, and the plagued army overran the dragons. She was the reason so many of my people were killed, and their bodies left behind, no chance for a proper burial. And she was the reason why my father, King Kadun, was dead. I would never see him again. Never hear his voice again or hear his deep laugh. Just like the rest of my family, he was dead, killed by an enemy I hadn't seen coming. Several more days passed since we voted, and Craig hadn't spoken to me. Not once. He locked himself away with Lucy and Tristan, as well as the shield shards. He was convinced they would save Kate, no matter how far gone she was. I wanted to believe we could save her, but how could I after what I saw? What I felt? I'd reached for Kate in those few moments, and all I felt was a dark void of nothingness. The more time passed since my father died, the more I was able to gather my emotions, shoving my grief to the side so I could aid the dragons, at least those that remained. We all mourned for what we lost, but many were still dealing with fear that the worst wasn't yet over. Any day now, Kate and Cassius would break into Boshan, and we'd be fighting for our lives all over again. Tristan and Drake took in the injured and those not fighting, leaving only the fighters behind, but none of them were ready for a war like this. It didn't take an empath to feel the despair weighing on everyone's shoulders, knowing the enemy outnumbered us and was being led by the one person meant to save us all. Thankfully, Lucy and her coven brewed enough potion now that every arrow, spear, and sword was coated with it. Whether the potion would last long the entire length of the fight, we wouldn't know until it happened. I walked aimlessly around my chamber, playing tug-of-war with my own guilt in my decision to stop Kate before it was too late. We'd all come so far together, and yet, it wasn't enough to stop her from turning. Wanting to go and talk to Craig, but already knowing he'd kick me out if not worse, I flung myself onto my bed and closed my eyes. Rest had been in short supply since our retreat here, and I didn't expect to fall asleep, but I dozed, and my mind drifted through an endless sea of twilight memories featuring my father. I missed him terribly. He was the leader, not me. I never expected this day to come, and definitely not so soon. The images shifted and changed until I was no longer Kate and I saw, but Kate and Craig. Her laughter washed over me like a tidal wave, and I was lost in the sound, feeling her hand cup my cheek, her lips against mine as we shared a few kisses. The three of us laughing as we sat around a campfire, acting like the kids we truly still were, and not the heroes we were destined to become. Or thought we were. Then it was just Kate's face in my mind's eye, and she stared at me sadly. She whispered my name, and I felt the ghost of her touch on my forehead smoothing down my cheek. Forrest. Forrest. I thrashed on the bed, wanting it to stop, but then it turned into a scream of pain, and she was being dragged away from me, tendrils of shadow wrapped around her body. Cassius cackled nearby as the darkness swarmed around her. And I did nothing but stand there and stare. Bit by bit it broke her down, and all the while she screamed my name, desperately trying to get to me. The betrayal in her eyes stabbed me like a dagger to the heart, over and over again, until with one final scream she was swallowed whole and vanished from sight. Forrest, help me, please. I jumped out of bed, drenched in sweat and glaring around my room. Stars filled the night sky outside my window, and I sank back to the bed, shaking my head. It was just a dream, I told myself. Only a dream. Forrest. I got out of bed again, spinning around like a madman in my room, half expecting to see Kate step out of the shadows, but I was alone. Great, now you're going crazy. I rubbed my face vigorously with both hands and left my chambers, hoping it would leave her behind too. Keep it together, there's nothing you can do for her. But after all the hate I felt toward her, all the pain she caused me, the idea of watching the council kill her, of me or Craig delivering that killer blow, drew an anguished cry from my mouth, and I fell to my knees in the middle of the torch-lit corridor. What was I doing? I couldn't kill Kate. My father was dead, but killing her, what would that do except open me up to the same darkness that tempted her, that turned her? I would become a monster and Cassius would win. That's why he'd done it. To drive me closer to the edge and forget what we were fighting for. What Kate was meant to do for us all. A heavy hand fell on my shoulder, and without looking up I knew it was Craig. He sat on the floor beside me and draped a comforting arm over my shoulders. He said nothing, he didn't have to. Regret and guilt drifted off him and bumped into me, as well as an unyielding hope and love so strong there was no doubt of his feelings for Kate. He loved her more than life itself, and no matter what I or the council decided, he wasn't going to let them hurt Kate. I'm so sorry, my friend, I whispered when I thought I could talk. I was so blinded by my grief, I didn't stop to understand. He squeezed my shoulder. It's all right. Better late than never, to realize the three of us are far from finished with each other. The shards, have you come up with a way to make them work yet? That would be good news, wouldn't it? Nothing. He shook his head. Lucy is as lost as I am on how to use them to find the rest of the shield, or even create a new shield using them. However it was formed all those years ago, I don't think we can recreate it. What do we do then? He stood and helped me up too. We wait for Kate to come, and when she gets here, we get her away from Cassius, and somehow we'll find a way to get her back. An ugly voice reared its head in my mind that she didn't deserve to be saved, but that was far from the truth. I clenched my jaw hard, and then Craig hugged me tightly like the true friend he'd become. I'm sorry we couldn't save Caden, he said. We'll make Cassius pay, I swear to you we will. I had no doubt we would, I just worried we'd be too late. Come on, let's go find some good demon grog. We headed down the corridor, and though I was still angry at Kate, I would not be helping anyone kill her. Not unless there was no option left. Chapter 11. Forrest. Craig and I sat in the kitchen through the rest of the night, and when the first lights of dawn broke over the horizon, we tossed the empty bottle of grog aside and cooked ourselves up some sausage and eggs for breakfast. We'd ranted about how unfair the world was, about his father and mine, about where we were now, and the horrible realization that we could still fail. He confessed he loved Kate, and I confessed that though I did too, after what happened, I didn't think I could ever feel as strongly for her as he did. Too much had happened, I worried I'd never get over. Caden's murder broke something inside me, showing me how cruel the world really was. Once this was all over, I would be busy rebuilding Gregornath anyway, and aiding my people with their new futures. There would be no time to spend with Kate, or even Craig for that matter. If you all live, you mean, I thought darkly, and suddenly I wasn't hungry. We just tucked into eating, discussing our plans to speak to the council again, and let them know we were going to re-vote on the Kate issue when bells rang out. Suddenly Craig cursed and was out of his chair in a blink, me right behind him. We sprinted into the courtyard to see Luca helping a mud-caked rider dismounting and staggering forward. "Sire. They've come, the enemy. They're here." "And the others? What about the others at the breach?" Craig asked, holding the man up by his shoulders. "Answer me." The man gulped, shaking his head. "Dead. They killed them all." "Damn it," Craig snapped, lifting his head. "Nora. Get him inside and to safety. Send for Tristan. Tell them the enemy is here." She bowed her head without argument, and holding the rider up with his arm over her shoulders, she maneuvered him toward the doors. Craig yelled out orders like a true king, and his soldiers burst into action, making ready for the attack that was soon to come. The breach was only a few hours' ride away, which gave us very little time to get ourselves in position. Craig told me to get my armor on and get the shards from Lucy. "I thought you said we couldn't use them?" I asked. "They might help," he said with a shrug. "I'm willing to try anything at this point. Aren't you?" There was no arguing that point, so I nodded and took off to find Lucy. She reluctantly handed over the shards until I swore to her I would not let anyone kill Kate. Her gaze held mine for a long moment before she nodded. "I knew you'd come around," she whispered, patted my cheek in thanks, and was off again. Grayson and the other witches and sorcerers right behind her. As I raced for the stairs, the shards clutched in my hand, I willed Kate to sense me somehow, to know we were still fighting for her. My nightmare appeared before me, but I growled and shook my head. It wasn't going to happen. I was not abandoning her. I put everything I had into those shards, and nearly ran into a wall when they burned suddenly warm in my palm. "Kate." I stared at the few pieces as they hummed with power. "We're here, Kate, and we're going to save you, I swear it." The shards continued to hum but did nothing else. It would have to be enough. By the time I dragged my leather armor on, donned my daggers and sword, and made it back to the courtyard, the iron gates sealed and locked, Craig was decked out in his full battle gear, the new executioner blade already in his hand. There was no talking, just the quiet clank of weapons being prepared, and arrows being dropped in buckets along the top of the wall. The catapults were cranked back, and for the first time ever, I wished modern technology worked within the realms. Guns and artillery would be extremely helpful right about now, but anything from the human world was always disrupted by the magic here. None of it worked the way it was meant to. I took my place beside Craig, and together we marched up the steps to the top of the wall over the gate and waited, peering into the distance. "Tristan and his men will be here soon," he said quietly. "Think it'll be enough?" "Gods no," he admitted with a bitter laugh, "but if it buys us time to get Kate, get her back to who she's meant to be, it'll be worth it. The three of us are the only ones who can stop this. We need her to end this war." "I know, I just wish we didn't have to lose so many." The wind blew the tall grasses across the plain, almost making it look like we stared out over a lake instead of a field. Beyond, the forests remained silent and dark. I wasn't sure how much time actually passed before we heard the first horses neighing, and the sounds of wagons and catapults being dragged closer and closer. Craig's grip tightened on his sword, and he stepped closer to the edge of the wall. Luca frowned behind him, Nora at his right, but said nothing. "They're here," Craig whispered. "Ready the men." Nora raised her hand out of the corner of my eye, and I watched as the archers along the walls readied their bows, and the few dragon warriors left capable of fighting shifted in the courtyard below. Swords were drawn, and it was as if everyone held their breath together. When the first plague walked out of the trees, a chorus of growls started around me, including Craig. But the only thing my eyes focused on was Kate. I sucked in a breath as a flare of deep sadness and pain hit me hard, and I moved closer to the edge of the wall, peering at her. She rode on a horse beside Cassius and Alice, executioner at her back, and that gauntlet holding her new shield on her left arm. But there was something different about her. "Craig," I whispered as my knuckles turned white from gripping the stones before me so hard. "Do you feel her?" he asked, hopeful. I swallowed hard, wondering if it was a fluke, but then the shards grew hot in my pocket where I'd tucked them away, and that same sadness reached for me again. "You were right, she's in there, but she's losing the fight. If we don't break his hold now, we won't get another chance." "Forrest." Each time she whispered my name, it was another blow that threatened to send me crashing to my knees. She was fighting tooth and claw to get free, but even her dragon was trapped. All along the wall, demons and dragons shifted on their feet, leather armor creaking as they waited. The plagued army filled the field in mere minutes, but Kate and Cassius rode on until they were barely 50 yards from the front gate. "Such a warm welcome," Cassius yelled with a smirk at us. "I must thank you, Craig. Now then, where is Rognal? I expected him to be a bit more happy to see me." I kept my face carefully blank as Craig did the same. It appeared Cassius was not all-knowing. "I'm afraid he is indisposed," Craig finally replied with a shrug. "Being killed will do that to a plagued, I hear." Cassius' smirk turned into a sneer, but it was Kate who gave her head a little shake, her hands fidgeting around the reins of her horse. "Rognal is dead?" Cassius shouted. "That he is, which makes me the new king, and you see," Craig went on, "I don't exactly accept those who have come to slaughter my people. Your best bet is to turn right around and go back to that cursed world. Leave us be." "I'm afraid I can't do that. Why don't you both come down here, and the four of us can discuss things in person?" He grinned at me, and I glowered right back at him. The man who murdered my father was so close, and yet he wanted to speak to us under a banner of truce, for a few moments at least. Craig stepped back from the wall and turned to me. "Can you control your anger if we go down there?" "Why? We both want him dead." "Yes, but he still has control of Kate, and Alice is down there with an entire army ready to attack. Chances of our surviving if we strike while we're down there alone are very slim, my friend." Letting Cassius slip through my fingers was the last thing I wanted to do, but Craig was right. "I will not kill him, at least not yet. You have my word." "Sire, no," Luca growled. "You cannot go out there alone." "We'll be fine, Luca," Craig assured him. "But if something happens to me, you are in charge." Luca exchanged a glance with Nora, but she looked at a loss for what they could do to stop their king. "As you wish, sire," Luca sighed and bowed his head. "Forrest? Shall we?" We waved at Cassius and Kate, and I saw them dismounting before they disappeared from sight as we left the wall and waited for the gate to be opened enough for us to slip through. Craig gave the order for them to seal it behind us, to the dismay of his soldiers. They gave in, and when it sealed behind us, I began to doubt this plan of ours. We moved through the tall grass together and stopped when we were fairly close to Cassius and Kate. The latter glowered at us fiercely, but she seemed off. As if she wasn't even sure why she was there. "Now then, isn't this better?" Cassius said with another grin. "No more yelling." "If you want to discuss terms, then name them," Craig stated. "Ah, yes, well, what I want is for you to leave Boshin to me and my commander here." Craig burst out laughing, and I inwardly groaned when Cassius' face visibly darkened. Craig's smile was cold. "Is that all? You just want me to uproot everyone and what, move to another realm? That's not going to happen, and you know it. Not without a damn bloody fight. You see this army behind me?" Cassius pointed over his shoulder. "They will overwhelm your walls and kill everyone inside. Is that what you want?" As Craig and he bantered back and forth, I watched Kate. I pushed my mind toward hers, recoiling at first when I was met with so much darkness and hatred. "Forrest. I can't see." I heard the words in my mind and sensed the pain eating away at her. "You have to fight," I whispered to her in my mind, no way of knowing if she could hear me or not. "Fight it. You are stronger than this, Kate, stronger than him." Kate blinked furiously and took a half step back. Cassius and Craig immediately fell silent when she growled, and smoke trailed out her nose. "Catherine," Cassius snapped. "Fine, I'm fine," she said, but then she growled louder and I took my chance. Unsure if it would work or not, I rolled all my emotion for her and those of Craig's into one massive thought and reached out to her, willing her to embrace the connection that existed between the three of us. My ears felt filled with cotton and my vision blurred while the rest of the world fell away. All that remained was Kate. She gasped the same time I did, and we both fell to our knees in the dirt. She grimaced in pain as Cassius spat curses at us both. "You will never get her back," he seethed and spun around, throwing his arms to the sides. "Destroy them. Destroy them all." Craig grabbed my arm hard as I glanced up in time to see the entire plagued army charging at us across the field.
Chapter 12. Kate. Nothing made sense. Forrest and Craig, they stood in front of me, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get my mouth to move. To call to them. I was trapped within my own head. Cassius, he and Craig were arguing, but then Forrest, he was there. Not just standing there, but inside my head. I saw him, before the darkness swirled in and blocked him from my sight. "No," I whispered, "let me go, let me out." Cassius' evil laughter flowed through my mind as I struggled to get free. I fought and screamed in anger, needing to get out of this prison I hadn't even realized I was in until now. Until we'd ridden up to the walls, and I saw Forrest and Craig ready for battle. To fight Cassius. To fight me. My dragon thrashed and roared, giving me the strength I needed to get through, calling out to Forrest that I was in here. Everything that happened the past few days slammed into me, and I gasped in horror, realizing what I'd done, what I'd let happen because I let the darkness in. Forrest's father was dead because of me. He should hate me, he should want me to be lost forever, but here he stood, fighting for me to break free. I needed to get back to them. I grimaced as pain shot through my skull, and finally, my foot moved. I stumbled backward, cursing as the darkness reared its ugly head, hissing and snarling, threatening to destroy me. But I was stronger, so much stronger. Then Cassius called for the attack to start, and everything moved in slow motion. The army charged forward, ready to swarm Craig and Forrest. They'd never make it back to the wall in time. Forrest started to shift, but Cassius threw himself at him, tackling him to the ground and stopped it from happening. Their blades were locked in a fierce battle, as Craig wielded a very familiar-looking blade, slicing through the first plague to reach him as they sprinted forward. But there were too many for them to fight off. Arrows flew from the wall, as Craig bellowed for them to fire. Plague went down in droves, staying down, and all the while I stood there letting them sprint past me as I tucked my head low, screaming for the darkness to leave me alone. More demons poured out of the front gates they'd flung open, but then Forrest snarled in pain. Cassius had slashed his arm with his blade, and Craig, he was on the ground as two plagued held him down. "No, no, no." Ea screamed, and as the shield Cassius had given me expanded, I brought it up high over my head. Cassius glowered at me, yelling for me to stop, but it was too late. I slammed the shield into the ground. It shattered at my feet, exploding and threw all of us backward as a shockwave shot through the army. Everyone was on their backs, and my ears were ringing. Dirt and grass fell around me. I heard voices yelling, but nothing would listen to me. I couldn't move. But I managed to smile, laughing as my hand brushed against a broken bit of the shield that had helped trap me in my own mind. Everything was muffled and fuzzy, but then someone was leaning over my face. I squinted, trying to see, but couldn't make anything out. My back hurt from landing on the sword sheathed there, and I was pretty sure something warm and wet dripped down my face. Two gentle hands cupped my cheeks, but whoever it was, I still couldn't tell. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a croak before I was hoisted over the person's shoulder, and then we were moving. Another figure was running behind us, and I saw more starting to get to their feet as others circled around us. A deep voice grumbled, the person who held me, and I heard a horn blow. "Kate, can you hear me?" I was maneuvered off his shoulder and into his arms, touching ground. "Kate. Craig?" I whispered, finally seeing the edges of his face come into focus. Where's Forrest?" A hand reached out and squeezed mine, a touch I'd know anywhere. What's happening? Cassius, the army? We're retreating, Craig said shortly. I shook my head, wanting to stay and fight against them, but I was being carried again, and there were more voices, flurry of movement, and then someone I didn't know stood in front of us, talking about portals and getting everyone to the Riverlands. I had no idea what that meant or where it was, but my mouth wouldn't work again. The man's eyes flared yellow, and for a second I swore it was a wolf looking at me. Then Craig and Forrest were speaking as more horns blared. I couldn't keep up with what was happening, but was too weak to do anything about it. Get them out. Get them all out. Craig yelled. Sire, we're abandoning Boshan? Another voice asked. I will not risk any more lives, Craig said firmly. It's just a place. We will regroup with the others and come back to fight, hopefully with enough numbers to win. Let's move. I curled my head against his chest as light suddenly surrounded us. Somewhere in the distance, Cassius shrieked my name, and I scrunched my eyes shut, trying to tune him out and pretend this was nothing but a bad dream. All of it. When I opened my eyes again, we were in an unfamiliar corridor and I was being laid down on a bed. My sword was gone, and it wasn't Craig speaking to me now. Mama Lucy? I whispered, confused at her gentle touch on my forehead. Right here, Kate, we're all right here, she promised and kissed my cheek. You just get some rest now, all right? You're safe. The others, what happened? I can't remember. Tears burned in my eyes, but why? What happened? I wanted to get out of bed and go look for myself, but my limbs were too weak to do anything except lay there. Why does everything hurt? I whimpered as throbbing pains started in my back and head. They spread all over my body, and my grunt of pain turned into a scream. It was too much. I couldn't take it any more. And Cassius, his laughter raced through my mind like knives, stabbing me and killing me slowly. I tried to tell Mama Lucy, but then wondered if this was all an illusion. If I'd actually broken the shield or not. Nothing made sense, and then were people in the room. Voices I should have recognized, but couldn't through the haze in my mind. Hands held my shoulders down and my ankles, and something cold as ice slipped down my throat. I was forced to swallow, and then there was blissful silence and true darkness.
Chapter 13. Craig. I brushed hair back from Kate's bruised and bloodied face. What's happening? Lucy sat back in her wooden chair by the bed. She's still fighting the darkness, she said quietly. What's left of it anyway? Most of it was destroyed when she shattered the shield. But she's going to be fine, right? I growled. Lucy. She needs rest, she said by way of answering and not answering my question. I have given her a heavy sedative that will keep her calm as she continues to fight. Right now the best thing for her is you two being here. Can she hear us? Forrest asked, moving to the other side of the bed to hold Kate's hand. It's possible, wouldn't hurt certainly. Lucy kissed Kate's forehead after she stood, then nodded to us both. I am needed to help seal the rest of the realm from Cassius. Send word for me when she wakes. Forrest answered for us both, and she left. Silence fell heavy in the room, aside from Kate's sharp intake of breath every few moments. I wanted to bust through her mind and drag whatever was tormenting her out and get rid of it for good, but all I could do was stand there and hold her hand. Forrest moved around the room, started a small fire in the hearth. The room had grown chilly as the sun set outside, over the rolling hills and green landscape, before reaching the rushing waters of the massive river that ran through the shifter's realm. Tirolf. I always liked it here far better than Boshan. It was peaceful and calm. Which part of me always found ironic, since the dragon shifters were one of the fiercest races ever known to us, aside from the orcs, apparently. The weather here was on the colder side, and when the flames burst to life in the hearth, I felt myself relax slightly. She'll wake up, Forrest promised me when he reached my side. How can you be so sure? Out there on that field. She chose to break that shield, she broke through the plague that held her trapped. She's stronger, much stronger than I think either of us ever give her credit for. His words were rough, and I sensed he was still angry with her, though his worry overrode those emotions for now. I squeezed Kate's hand, willing her eyes to open, but they remained firmly closed. I talked to her quietly, telling her all about what happened with Forrest and me when we were with the sorcerers, while he kept a close watch at the window. I caught him grinning a few times and kept going. I told her about my father, and how I was the king now. But when a flicker of anger shot across Forrest's face, I changed the subject. When I ran out of things to say, I ran my thumb over the back of her hand, praying to whatever gods would listen that we needed her to live. Hours passed, and Forrest dragged over another chair to sit at her side. We both held her hand, and I dozed. Tristan stopped by sometime during the night, offering us encouraging smiles and whispering that the realm for the time being was secure. He restoked the fire, then left us alone again. I passed in and out of sleep, worry eating away at me that we'd failed Kate after all. But then as the sun's first rays fell through the window, my eyes shot open, and I stared intently at her hand in mine. Forrest was awake too, and we both watched her, anxiously waiting. When it happened again, we both were on our feet. "Kate," I whispered softly. "Kate, can you hear me? Open your eyes, love." She winced, but slowly, one eye opened, followed by the other, and her eyes were clear. Not a hint of plague in them. I hung my head in relief and kissed her forehead as Forrest squeezed her hand. "Craig? Forrest? What happened? Where am I?" She tried to sit up, but I gently shoved her shoulders back down. "Just hold on a second. You're weak right now. Give yourself some time," I growled. She looked like she wanted to argue, but then she shifted her gaze to Forrest. He tried to keep a smile on his face, but the second she remembered, the entire atmosphere in the room changed. She sucked in a breath and scooted back to the headboard, yanking her hands free of our grips. No, that's not right," she whispered harshly. "Forrest? Your dad. I'm so sorry." He clenched his jaw and nodded, struggling to keep it together. I watched him closely, but there was no sign he was going to lose it. "I know, it wasn't you, Kate. But I let it in," she argued, voice shaking. "I did this. I did all of this." Her face paled, and she looked like she was going to be sick. Before I could stop her, she shoved past me, leapt off the bed, and sprinted out of the room. I had no idea where she was going, and took off after her, leaving Forrest behind. I found her, shaking as she wrapped her arms around herself, staring out a window in the corridor at an unfamiliar landscape. "Kate," I whispered softly and reached out for her, but she flinched away. "You can't blame yourself for what happened." "Yes, I damned well can," she shot back furiously, her voice cracking with emotion. "No. Cassius manipulated you. He used you for the power that was inside of you, that's all. You can't just use that as an excuse," she yelled, and the few people in the corridor nearby stopped what they were doing to listen. Her eyes darted over my shoulder, and when tears shimmered in her eyes, I knew Forrest was there. "I left you both because I thought I could save you, and look what happened. It doesn't matter now. You're here and we're safe." "For how long?" she said on a breath. "I'm sorry, I don't think I can do this." I tried to reach for her again, but she slipped past me, stopping when she reached Forrest. I heard her whisper to him, and his face tightened before she kept going, and a door slammed a moment later. "What did she say?" I asked Forrest. He ran a hand down his face and shrugged. "That she'll understand if I hate her for what happened. That's it." I made to go to her again, but he caught my arm. "What?" "She needs time. Give her that." "What for?" The last thing I wanted to do was leave Kate alone while she is in such a depressed and confused state. I saw her locked away, hurting herself, and tried to go after her, but Forrest didn't let go of my arm. "She has to come to grips with what happened. Your pushing the issue could make things worse," he argued, but not angrily. Instead, he sounded sad, and his hand fell back to his side. "Give her time." I growled in annoyance, but prevented myself from rushing to her. He was right, deep down I knew that, but it didn't mean I had to like it right then. I considered going and sitting outside her door in case she emerged and wanted to talk, or I heard her screaming again, But then Tristan was there, hurrying toward us. "Please tell me there's nothing wrong?" I asked. "Not yet, but we're working on our defenses, and I figured you two could use a distraction." His glance slipped to Kate's closed door. "And Lucy will want to know she's awake." Forrest nodded and said to lead. I followed, pausing for just a moment outside Kate's door. When I leaned in closer, I heard her crying, and my heart ached to go to her. But she would push me away. I saw it in her eyes when she'd rushed past me. She wanted nothing to do with us right now. I could only hope those feelings wouldn't last forever. Chapter 14. Craig. 4 days passed, and each one only made my ire grow worse. I snapped at everyone, and was constantly apologizing for walking around, growling without even realizing I was doing it. There was no sign of Cassius yet on the horizon, no sign of any plague within Tirolf. I should have been happy that we had more time to prepare our defenses. The council had even met, and after realizing Kate had been saved, didn't hold it against us for not following through with their decision. "When will the Vindicar be ready to fight?" Drake asked that morning, and I gripped the arms of my chair so hard they cracked. "Is she not recovering well?" I hung my head, unable to answer without snarling, leaving Forrest or Lucy to answer for me. "Physically, her wounds have healed," Lucy explained slowly, "but her mind is still in turmoil. Cassius did a number on her, and she's having trouble separating what was real and what was an illusion." There was more to it than that, but Lucy said nothing else on the matter. Drake sighed heavily. "We are going to need her if we are to beat this darkness. Isn't that what the prophecy states? Only the Vindicar and you two can defeat Cassius for good." My hands tightened more, and the arms of the chair did snap this time. I blinked furiously as Tristan's brow arched. "Glad I never liked these chairs," he murmured. "Sorry." I dropped the broken arms to the floor and paced around the meeting room. We had caught the council up on everything Celandine told us, especially with how the darkness even came about. Forrest reminded them again that Cassius might not be the only thing we had to worry about. Hell, for all we knew, this prophecy could be a bunch of nonsense. Nothing we'd managed to do so far had worked to combat the evil spreading through the realms. With each one he took control of, his strength would grow, using the power of our races to feed that darkness. And we knew he'd taken prisoners, those unable to escape. They would be used as soldiers in his army, or worse, human sacrifices. And all we could do was sit here and twiddle our thumbs, waiting. I hated it. Hated everything about our current predicament, but worse because we weren't complete. Kate had locked herself in her room and had not come out. Not once. I tried to check on her, but she refused to see me or Forrest. Lucy was the only one who was allowed in her room, and every time she left, she would shake her head sadly, even as she told me to have hope. But my hope was quickly being crushed with each passing hour. I didn't know what was happening inside Kate's head. Forrest, despite his anger over the death of his father, still was worried too. But nothing we said reached her. He told me a few times all he sensed from her was guilt and sorrow, and a fierce anger he couldn't tell who it was meant to be directed at. She needed us to help her get through this, but she blocked us out instead. "Craig?" Tristan asked loudly, and I whirled around to see the entire council staring at me. "What?" "You're snarling to yourself quite loudly," he informed me. "If you need to leave, we'll understand." I meant to say no, I was supposed to be here, but my feet were already moving toward the door. I stormed out of it and stalked through the castle. Kate was not going to spend another damn day locked in that bloody room alone. Whatever haunted her, whatever fight she was still fighting, she was going to get through it with me by her side. I didn't care what she wanted anymore. This was what she needed. I pounded my fist on her door when I reached it, startling the few guards close by. "Kate. Open this door right now, damn it." "Go away," she yelled. "Not until we talk." "There's nothing I want to say to you, just please, leave me alone, all right?" I heard her mutter something else but couldn't hear through the door. I pounded again, and she yelled in aggravation. You can yell all you want at me, but we are going to talk, and I'm not leaving until we do. The door opened a crack, but that wasn't good enough. I pushed it open all the way and stomped inside, slamming it behind me. I was ready to scold her when I finally turned to see her face, and the words died in my mouth. There were heavy bags under her eyes, and her hair was lank and dirty. Her face was pale, and just standing there, she was shivering as if she was cold. She even looked gaunt, as if she hadn't eaten in a week. I reached out, ready to tuck her in my arms, but she stepped backward, and my anger flared back to life. "What are you doing?" I snapped. "Nothing that concerns you," she mumbled, marching to stand in front of the fire. "You do realize what's going on out there, right? This isn't over, Kate. The war is just getting started, and we need you to remember that." She hung her head and sniffed hard, wiping at her eyes. "What do you want from me, huh?" "What?" "I want our Kate back," I insisted. "The Kate that was ready to fight." She didn't say anything, and only wrapped her arms tighter around herself. "I know what you went through is hard to understand, but you can't wallow in your misery day in day out. It's going to eat you alive if you let it, and honestly, we don't have time for this. You should be planning with us, working with us to figure out a way to make those shards work, so we can destroy this darkness for good. Isn't that what you want? Isn't that important to you still? Or have you forgotten everything that matters? You're just going to be selfish and pretend the world isn't falling apart around you." My words were harsh, and the second I said them, I wished I could take them all back. Her eyes narrowed, but what I expected to happen didn't. There was no flare of power in her eyes, and the runes on her body didn't pulse with light. "That's what you think, really?" she snapped sharply. "You think I'm hiding up here because I don't care? Why else would you tuck yourself away?" I argued. "Do you have any idea what I did?" she yelled as tears slipped down her cheeks. "I got Caden killed, the father of someone I care about. He's dead. I almost let you and Forrest get killed, the two people in this world who mean everything to me. You. I watched you be attacked, and Cassius, he almost convinced me to kill you both. Do you have idea what that feels like?" I ground my teeth and nodded. "The council wanted us to kill you too." She blinked surprised but shook her head. "Maybe you should've." "What?" I couldn't have heard that right, but when I asked her to repeat it, she said the exact same thing. "How can you say that? People are dead because of me. Because of what I let happen. I wasn't strong enough," she ranted, pacing back and forth in front of the fire, running her hands madly through her hair. "I couldn't stop the darkness from taking hold, couldn't break free." "But you did," I argued, hating the guilt in her eyes. "You shattered that shield, you're free of it." But I was too late. I was too late to save the people I was meant to protect. Instead, I got them killed. I can't be what you need me to be." I shook my head, unable to wrap my mind around what she was trying to say. "What are you talking about? You are Catherine Dara. You are the Vindicar. You are the only one here who can stop this." "No," she said, her voice shaky. "No, I'm not. I don't understand." I wanted to go to her so badly, but her glare said she didn't want me, and not because she didn't care for me, but because she cared too much. "Kate, please, listen to me." "No, all right. I'm not who you thought I was. I'm just Kate." "That's not true, and you bloody know it," I growled. "You are the one meant to wield that shield, you're meant to drive out the darkness. Just as Celandine did." She laughed bitterly. "I'm not her, I never can be her. Kate, you can't give up on yourself." "And why not?" she asked quietly, turning her back on me, and I knew I was losing her. "You can't save everyone. And me. Maybe you're not meant to save me. Maybe this was all just a mistake, a horrible mistake." I planted my feet and stared at her intently, willing her to turn back around. "I refuse to believe that. The day you found me in the diner? We were meant to meet. This is your destiny, our destiny, and I am not going to let you give up on yourself." There's no point. Don't waste your energy, not on me. Her shoulders trembled, and I knew she was still crying. There's no point. My hand lifted, and I moved, so close to holding her, but I couldn't close the distance. I breathed hard in and out through my nose, chest heaving, as my heart pounded away behind my ribs. This wasn't happening, it couldn't be, but she said nothing else, and she didn't face me again. Cassius broke her. The darkness, the plague, they destroyed her spirit, and all that was left was a shell of the Kate I knew. The Kate I'd come to love. I'm not giving up you, I swore fiercely. Not yet. Don't you dare give up on yourself. I turned on my heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the door shut behind me. I rested my back against it, holding my face in my hands as my world crumbled at the edges. How could she just think of throwing her life away? As if nothing mattered. As if her connection to me and Forrest was just happenstance. This, the three of us, it was fate, and one way or another, I had to get her to remember.
Chapter 15. Forrest. I watched Craig continue to growl and storm through the halls as the days wore on. Whatever he said to Kate, he didn't tell me. She refused to come out of her room still, and with each passing day, the worry in Lucy's eyes turned worse. Several times, I found myself outside her door, my hand raised to knock, but I wasn't sure yet if I could stop myself from going off on her for what happened. Part of me knew she wasn't really to blame, but that did little to stop the rampaging emotions in my mind. And it wasn't just mine I was dealing with. Though I could feel everyone else's emotions around me, they were nothing compared to what Craig and Kate bombarded me with day in and day out. Anger and fear came off him in continual waves, while I winced as the guilt Kate felt spilled into me repeatedly. Every time I neared her door, I had to suck in a deep breath to stop myself from falling over. I didn't have to say anything to her. She felt bad enough for what happened. But I didn't want her to, not forever. Guilt would only weigh her down and make things worse for her, not better. And yet I couldn't get myself to say that to her face, to tell her I forgave her for what happened. Instead, I worked with Grayson and the other sorcerers at trying to figure out what to do with the shards. I don't understand, I muttered as another day gave way to another stressful night. Why isn't anything working? For hours, Grayson and Lucy worked to try and figure out what power was left in the shards. I told them earlier I felt them come alive in my hand, as if they called out to Kate, but since we brought her back, nothing. No hint that there was any power left in them. I feared when she destroyed the other shield, she somehow damaged her connection to the real one. Has she said anything else that might help? I asked quietly. A growl issued from the corner where Craig sat, brooding, but I ignored him. Nothing, no. She hardly speaks of what happened. She hardly speaks at all, Lucy replied sadly, sinking into another chair. I'm worried her mind is slipping away. Another growl sounded, and I glared at Craig. What did you say to her? Nothing that wasn't true, he grunted. I cringed as his anger mingled with worry struck me like a punch to the gut. Damn it. Will you get a hold of your anger? You're going to drive me insane. Both of you are. I can't help it, he raged. Well, figure it out. I'm about ready to tear my hair out right now. You're pissed and worried, and she's overwhelmed with guilt. What did you say, Craig? It's not what I said that should worry you, he spat. It's what she told me. Care to share? I asked, marching over to stand in front of him. She said she was not the Vindicar, and that everything that happened is an accident, he snapped. That she isn't meant to be a part of this. Of us. His words pelted me, and I staggered backward as they resounded in my head. She said that? How could she think that? She wouldn't say, he growled and shook his head. I tried all right? I tried, and she wouldn't let me in. I don't know what to do for her, but Kate. I'm not sure she'll ever be the same again, and I don't know what to do anymore. The pain in his voice tore at me, but then he was out of the chair and leaving the room in a hurry before I could think to say anything helpful. None of us had slept much since coming here, and exhaustion tugged at me as I stared absently at Craig's vacated seat. We aren't making any headway tonight, Lucy assured me. Get some sleep. I'm not sure I can sleep. Try. At least shut your eyes for a while. I have a feeling this peace and quiet of ours won't last long. And Kate? I asked as I faced her. Lucy smiled sadly. There's nothing any of us can do. She has to figure this out on her own. I didn't ask what I wanted to, knew Lucy was thinking the same thing. Was Kate even strong enough to pull herself out of his depression? I glanced one more time at the shards and asked if I could take them with me. It probably wouldn't do any good, but it had been too long since I'd at least seen Kate's face, let alone try to talk to her. With the shards in hand, I moved through the quiet castle as torches were lit for the night, and found myself outside Kate's room. I knocked lightly after sucking in a deep breath. Kate? You awake? I heard movement through the door and expected her to yell at me to go away, but the door opened, just enough for me to see her. My jaw dropped, and I choked on whatever I'd been about to say next. She looked terrible, worse than I expected, and I clutched my hands so tightly around the shards they cut my skin. She frowned at me, then down at my hand. Forrest, you're bleeding, she whispered and reached for my hand. Her skin was cold, and I suddenly wanted to hug her, just to try and warm her up. I let her open my palm, mumbling about getting my hand wrapped up, when she froze. Kate? What are you doing with these? I glanced down confused, having completely forgotten I had the shards with me. I brought them for you to hold on to. I wiped the bit of blood from my hand off them with my shirt, and took her hand. They're yours after all. She tried to pull her hand back, but I was already dropping the shards into her palm. I don't deserve these, she whispered. Yes, you do. You are Adara, and you are the Vindikar, Kate. She shook her head, but I kept her hand closed around the pieces, softly. Why are you doing this? Why are you both not listening to me? Because you're wrong, I said simply and gently cupped her cheek. And I needed you to know I forgive you for what happened. We all do. She shut her eyes and a single tear slipped down her cheek, but then she was backing away and closed her door. I stayed where I was for a few more moments before I slowly walked to my room and fell onto my bed. I didn't expect to sleep, but the second my eyes closed, I drifted off and was lost in a storm of faces. Craig was there, fighting beside me as plague surrounded us. Kate, I saw her too, but she was staring at us darkly, the dark shield in her hand. She was saying something, but I couldn't hear the words. Then, unexpectedly, there were two Kates, and they were fighting each other fiercely. Craig was suddenly gone, and before I got to see what happened to Kate, the nightmare shifted and I saw my father in the courtyard again. I didn't want to be here, but I couldn't get myself to wake up. I watched it happen all over again, and then I was on another battlefield watching more people die. But this time I wasn't me. And it wasn't Craig and Kate beside me, but Brodian and Celandine. We were fighting the plagued, but this was different than what I'd seen before. Then suddenly, the entire battle stopped, and a hand fell on my arm. Celandine. She was looking at me, and her lips moved, but I couldn't hear what she said. What? I asked, but my voice sounded muffled to me even. She was still talking, but time was starting to speed up again. Screams filled my ears, and then there was a blinding light that consumed everything in front of me. I yelled as I shot up in bed, sending Craig flying backward. Damn man, what were you dreaming about? Craig muttered, picking himself up off the floor. I shut my eyes, then opened them wide, staring around my room. The sun was up and my room was freezing. I'd forgotten to start a fire last night. Morning. I'd slept all night long but was far from rested. Shit, I grunted and swung my legs over the side of the bed. You look about as good as I feel, Craig muttered. Nightmares? Yeah, but there was something else happening. I strained to remember, but everything was fuzzy. Did you wake me up on purpose or what? He clenched his jaw. Tristan and his scouts spotted a few suspicious figures moving at the outskirts of the Riverlands, he told me. Figured you and I could use some time away. Go with him on patrol and check it out. I saw the hope in his eyes that we might get to kill something, and decided that sounded like a great idea. I could use a few plague to take my pent-up emotions out on too. Right, let's go then. Once I was dressed and armed, I met Craig in the corridor, and we hurried to catch up to Tristan at the stables. I glanced one final time at the castle, before mounting up and riding out of the main gate. Chapter 16. Forrest. We rode along the river all the way to the borders of Tyrolf, but there had been no sign of any plague. The air was strange though, heavy almost. I expected to see storm clouds on the horizon, but the sky was clear and bright blue. You sure we're in the right place? Craig asked Tristan. They said near here. His eyes flared gold as he sniffed the air and growled. Something's been here, this way. He dismounted and slunk into the trees, his 3 guards quick to follow, leaving Craig and I to catch up. We stayed low, as the scent of burning hit my nose suddenly. I bit back a curse, and ahead of me, I heard Craig mutter. There were definitely plagued here. The question was, how many? We crept deeper into the trees, until Tristan held up his hand stopping us. Voices sounded close by, and we crawled through the underbrush to the edge of a hill, covered by bushes, and stared down at the makeshift camp. There were tents for at least 30 or 40, but I only counted 6 plague demons. They were talking quietly amongst each other. No sign of Cassius was there, but my ears perked up when someone said, Alice. Craig nudged my arm and pointed. Tracks led out of the camp, headed east. East toward the castle where Kate was. I couldn't tell how old the tracks were. We needed to know when they left and how many, but before I could even ask Tristan if we should attack, he let out a fierce howl, and I watched as his massive black wolf ripped through his clothes and took off down the slope. His guards followed close behind, their howls joining with their king's. Craig charged in next, and I dove straight for one of the plague trying to escape the camp. I grappled with him, hitting him in the face with the hilt of my dagger, before I spun him around and wrapped an arm around his throat to hold him. We needed at least one alive, and from the way Tristan and his guards were attacking, and Craig had already decapitated one, this one would do. When the fight was over, Tristan and his guards shifted back, hurrying toward me and my prisoner. How many are you? He demanded, with a growl. The plagued in my grip shook his head, but I dug the tip of my dagger into his neck. Answer now or your death will be nice and slow, I warned. 40, he muttered. And Alice? Why so few? Tristan asked. Answer me. They want her back, he yelled. They came for the Vindicar. Why? I asked as panic filled me that just wasn't my own. He gulped, but I dug the dagger in deeper, drawing blood. To kill her. Cassius wants her back, so he can kill her in front of you. Make you all suffer. I wasn't sure if it was my anger, or Craig's that made me plunge that dagger the rest of the way into the plagued demon's throat. He sputtered as I let him fall to the ground dead. Kate was in trouble. The tracks leaving the camp weren't very fresh, and we were an hour away if not more. None of us said a word as we sprinted back through the trees to our horses, praying we'd get there in time.
Chapter 17. Kate. I sat at the window, a heavy blanket around my shoulders, and stared at the blue sky. It was so cheerful and happy out there, it made me almost sick. My mind was still working at accepting everything I'd done to those around me, the lives lost, the pain I caused. I wanted to get better, I did, but the guilt kept holding me back. That and the nightmares I had, hearing Cassius' voice whisper in my ear. His cackling laughter. It wouldn't stop, no matter what I did. Craig and Forrest needed to just leave me alone. They were fighting a lost cause, and I hated to think how much time they wasted on trying to bring me back, when they should have been focused on saving Tyrolf and the rest of the realms before Cassius took them over too. Every day was a struggle, and I wondered what the point of it all had been. If fate found it amusing to show me what I could have, and then rip it all away and say it was just a joke. One big fat joke. I clutched the blanket tighter around my shoulders, and glared around the room as I rested my head back against the stone wall. There wasn't much here, and I was all right with that, but then the sunlight glinted off something on the mantel, and I frowned. The shards. Forrest had left them with me last night, after saying he forgave me. I didn't want to believe him since I hadn't forgiven myself yet, but I saw the sincerity in his eyes. I didn't deserve it, not his kindness or Craig trying to talk to me. None of it. I was about to fall back into bed and sleep away another day when that dark cackling filled my ears again. "Leave me alone," I whispered weakly, slinking away from the window to walk around the room. But the laughter only grew louder until it drowned out all other sound. I grimaced, sinking onto the edge of the bed and prayed for everything to just end. When two hands reached out and grabbed my shoulders, I screamed, thinking Cassius was here after all, but then I heard Mama Lucy's voice and I let her hold me. "Oh my sweet girl," she whispered. "We have to find a way to stop this." I cried. There was nothing else I could do. I was tired, so tired, and my head wouldn't stop throbbing. I thought I was going to be the hero in all of this. I mumbled through my tears. I thought I'd be saving lives, and instead I just made everything worse. She hugged me tighter as the tears continued to stream down my cheeks, and she shushed me softly. "That's no way to think. Not at all. You are more important than you realize. You're the only one that seemed to have forgotten that fact, young lady." She set me back from her, giving me that scowl she saved for when one of her kids did something wrong. "I did not raise you to be a quitter, Catherine Dara. What am I supposed to do?" "You pick yourself up and you get back out there," she urged. "You keep fighting." "But what if I'm not? I'm not this Vindikar? What if everything we thought was wrong?" Mama Lucy cupped my face in her hands, wiping away my tears with her thumbs. "You listen to me, Catherine. It doesn't matter if you are or you aren't." "What do you mean?" "The will to fight comes from who you are, who you let yourself be, not what someone tells you. Prophecy or no, family line or no, you are a good person. And you will fight for what's right, I know you will." I let out a shuddering breath and nodded, feeling hope for the first time in days. Weeks even. "And this is no way to spend your 18th birthday." I shook my head. "No, that's still a few months away, right?" "Afraid not, my girl. Time passes quite differently, and you turned 18, well, a few days ago actually. Happy belated birthday, Kate." My lips lifted in a smile, and she hugged me again when bells resounded through the castle. We pulled away, and she rushed to the window. "No, oh no." "What? What's wrong?" I ran over to join her, and growled when I spied the plagued who managed to climb over the wall and were currently racing along the top. "Alice," I snarled. A voice of doubt rose in the back of my mind, reminding me that I was nothing, but executioner was already in my hands, and barefoot, I took off out the door, Mama Lucy right behind me. Heart pounding in time with my feet, I shouted for Craig and Forrest, but Grayson met me at the bottom of the steps, shaking his head. "Craig, Forrest, and Tristan are gone," he said, Luca and Nora sprinting up behind him. "The wounded and the innocent," I said, turning to Luca. "We have to ensure their safety." "And yours, Kate?" "No, I have to go out there," I argued as the sounds of the fight grew closer. I hadn't been able to see how many attacked, but they were already inside the walls, and the amount of damage they could cause was unthinkable if they were only here to spread the plague. "No, you and Lucy, go to the hall and stay with the others, please," Luca begged. I gripped my sword fiercely in my hand but nodded, if not for his sake then for Craig, who probably gave him the order to keep me safe while he was away. Mama Lucy came with me, and together we ran to the hall and once inside barricaded the doors. Mama Lucy worked at calming everyone down as I stood at the doors, holding executioner at the ready, as the 4 other guards in there with me did the same with their swords. 2 demons and 2 shifters. No one said a word. No one dared. At first I heard nothing through the doors, and thought the attackers had already been beaten back. But then a roar shook the castle walls, and yells of dying men penetrated the heavy door. "Mama Lucy," I threw over my shoulder, "get everyone back as far as you can." She didn't argue, and I heard them shuffling further back. As I and the 4 guards did the same, moving away from the doors, while another roar made the doors tremble in their frames. My toes gripped the stones, and I forced my breathing to calm down. Not sure if it would work or not, I reached out for Craig or Forrest, hoping one of them would hear and know we needed help. But I couldn't feel them, and after a few seconds of trying, I cringed as my temples throbbed in pain and my vision blurred. "My lady?" one of the demons asked quietly, but I shook my head. "Fine, I'm fine. Get ready." Why they listened to me, I wasn't sure, but each one fell into a defensive stance, ready for whatever broke through that door. The screams from outside cut off suddenly, and something breathed heavily outside the door, its hot breath seeping under them and bringing with it a scent I could only describe as death. My breathing turned ragged, and my fingers shifted in a constant dance on the hilt of my sword. Waiting. I heard the intake of breath a second before I screamed for everyone to get down, throwing myself at the two guards on either side of me. We hit the floor just as the doors exploded inward, and screams rang out around us. Darkened flames shot over our bodies, singeing hair and clothes. I grimaced as white-hot pain lashed at my back, keeping my head down until it finally stopped. The floor vibrated with each heavy step the beast took, but I didn't even have to look over my shoulder to know what it was or who. Each movement making me want to scream in pain, I rolled to my side and dragged myself to my feet. The guards lay still on the floor, breathing but unconscious. Behind me were whimpers of fear and prayers being whispered. But it was the black-scaled dragon that resided before me that had my full attention. A beast I'd faced down once before. "Alice," I breathed. His dragon lips smirked as smoke trailed from his nostrils and black flames dripped from his jaws. His massive head tilted to the side as he took another step in, the plague still fighting the others behind him. I spotted Luca, at least still alive, but the rest was blocked by Alice spreading his massive wings, trapping us in the hall. The only way to fight a dragon was to be a dragon. I felt my inner beast rear her head, ready for a fight, but Alice raised his massive front left foot and slammed it into the floor, stopping me from shifting. I sank to my knees as the power rushed back into me, taking my breath away. "You know," I snarled, expected my voice to be shaking with fear, but instead a raw anger flowed out, giving me the strength to straighten again, staring him down. "I'm getting really tired of people thinking they can control me." Alice scoffed, his lip lifting to reveal his fangs. "I'm not scared of you," I growled. "Not even close." Voices screamed inside my mind, making my face scrunch as they pounded against my skull. I doubled over, remembering other voices instead. Voices that gave me hope and strength. Craig and Forrest, talking to me while I was unconscious. Forgiving me for all I'd done wrong, telling me I was worth everything they went through. Their laughter deafened the screaming, and I squared my shoulders as I laughed in Alice's face while his jaws parted in a snarl. "Cassius wants you to kill me, is that it?" His head tilted in acknowledgement, and his growling laughter that rushed over me with that horrible stench of death. I glanced at the sword in my hand, the point resting against the stones, before my gaze shot back to his. He should have sent more men. I swung the blade wide and slashed at Alice's face. He roared in pain, head flying back from the hit, and I continued the attack. I dodged around his body, slashing and stabbing every inch of him I could reach as he scrambled to try and snag me in his jaws. But the space was too tight, and he couldn't move quick enough. I climbed on his back and plunged the sword down into his spine, hoping to paralyze him, but then his claw snagged my shirt, and I cursed as he threw me aside. I slammed into the stone floor as he charged over, and the innocents screamed with fear. I couldn't let him get to them. His eyes took in the others in the room, and I heard him chortle a second before his chest glowed with his inner fire. Mama Lucy held her arms wide, facing down certain death as she closed her eyes, telling the others to get down. They huddled together, and time suddenly slowed around me. All my doubts over the past few weeks, all my fears of what my actions had wrought to these people, to the realms, faded to nothing as I watched Alice prepare to slaughter so many more. There was no way I could stop him, not like this. "Kate," Celandine whispered in my mind, "this is who you are, Kate. Embrace it." Before I had a chance to make sense of her words, time was speeding up, and Alice threw his head back, ready to unleash his fury on the people. I yelled as I threw myself forward and drove my blade right into the side of his face. His jaws snapped shut, and he threw me around as I held on, clinging to my blade while he thrashed and roared in rage. His claws scratched and dug into my skin. I screamed in pain and he finally dislodged me, throwing me to the ground before Mama Lucy. My sword was still stuck in his face and he yanked it free. I watched in horror as he snapped the blade in half and tossed the pieces aside as if they were nothing but twigs. Those flames grew again as blood seeped from his wounds, not enough to stop him. I saw my death in his eyes as they locked onto mine. Saw the smile on his face as once again, he opened his mouth to let the flames consume us all. As the first flame parted his lips, I threw my arms across my face to shield me and try to take the brunt of it. I wasn't going to give up without a fight. But the flames never struck me, and I heard Mama Lucy gasp in shock. "Kate, by the gods, Kate." Confused, I opened my eyes at the same time. An intense heat flowed from the stones at my feet and up through my body. It burst through every limb, circling around me in the purest blue light I'd ever seen in my life. Alice's fire couldn't touch me. It curved back at him, as the light continued to swirl up my body until it surrounded me completely. The runes I hadn't seen glow since before I met Cassius flared to life now, pulsing with a life of their own as that heat scorched my soul, reignited my very soul. When it reached an apex overhead, it slammed back down and rushed out of my arms to my fingertips, creating a shield of pure light and magic before it solidified into a solid round shield, its weight heavy but so comforting on my arm. "The shield of the Vindicar," I whispered, stunned. Alice growled as he glared at me. I stood taller, my hair blowing back from the power coursing through my veins, power I had a taste of when I first started out on this journey. But this is what it felt like to be the Vindicar. I smirked a split second before I unleashed a battle cry, with more than just me crying out. Celandine's voice joined mine, as well as those of other Daras lost to this darkness as I attacked. I swung the shield, smacking Alice so hard across the face, he flipped onto his side, fighting to find his balance, but I was on him again, not giving him a chance to return the attack. With each hit I screamed, letting him feel my pain, my anger, drawing more blood than my sword ever could. The shield burned into his scales, and he shrieked in agony as I landed a solid blow to his right eye. His wings sank, and suddenly the dragon was gone, and Alice staggered away from my advance, holding his hand to his bleeding face. "You bitch," he snapped. "I'll kill you. You are nothing. You're nothing, do you hear me?" I continued to stalk toward him, forcing him out of the hall. The rest of the plagued were all but dead, a few still managing to cling to life, but as Alice passed them they froze. Luca ran two of them through, and relieved them of their heads for good measure before I noticed his odd gaze watching me closely. "Cassius will rule the realms," he continued to rant as I forced him toward the main doors. He tripped over his feet and fell down the stone steps leading to the courtyard, but jumped right back up as I stomped down them one by one to join him at the bottom. He spat at my feet, but I didn't break my gaze away from his. Not for a second. A warm wind whispered past my ear, carrying with it words that had waited centuries to be spoken. I nodded sadly, as I focused on Alice as I watched his hand slither toward the two daggers at his hips. "Your father forgives you, Alice," I told him just as several riders appeared at the gate. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Alice sputtered curses as he grabbed the daggers and struck, aiming to stab me. I sidestepped his attack and spun in a tight circle, smashing the shield in his back and sent him to the ground. He rolled over, and before his next bout of insults could leave his mouth, I brought the shield down on his neck. His severed head rolled a few feet away, eyes wide and mouth agape as the darkness seeped out of his body before sinking into the stones with a hiss. "Kate?" I straightened, still holding the shield firmly in my grasp, and met the two sets of eyes watching me in shock. Then they both broke out into smiles, and Craig and Forrest rushed to me. They hugged me between them, as I felt the power of the Vindicar settle back into my body and the shield. Just as the dark shield had, this one shrank into a gauntlet that rested on my arm. I hugged them back fiercely. "You just killed Alice," Forrest whispered as he stepped back. Yeah, I did." A heavy silence fell over the courtyard, as Tristan also dismounted and cautiously approached. He eyed me warily, almost with fear. "What? At least it's not like the time I had a fractured leg hanging out of my mouth." I kept my face dead serious for a few heartbeats, before Tristan let out a wolfish laugh and the tension broke. "Catherine Dara," he said as he approached and bowed his head. "Vindikar, it is a pleasure to make your acquaintance." I was taken aback by his words, and worse, when all the others in the courtyard also bowed their heads to me. Craig and Forrest stepped back a bit further, and though the first was smirking when he did it, he too lowered his head in reverence. This was who I was meant to be. And no one was going to tell me differently. I stared past them all out the front gate, and dared Cassius to come for me now. This time I was ready. This time I would kill him.
Chapter 18. Craig. The castle that had been filled with depressed and dour faces since we arrived was filled with laughter and smiles that night. The best sight of all was seeing Kate, her eyes bright and happy as she danced with Luca and others, as she joked and feasted and drank with the rest of us. Kate was back. Lucy filled us in on what happened, and Luca had been close by, nodding in stunned silence at what Lucy relayed. It appeared the shield was never meant to be found and pieced back together. Only the true Vindikar could create it and use it at the moment when it was needed most. Kate had saved so many people by throwing herself in front of them, ready to die. It scared the shit out of me that we wouldn't have made it in time, and she could have been killed. But she was alive, and I tried my best to relax and enjoy the night with everyone else. Forrest plopped down in the empty chair beside me, handing over another full cup of demon grog. I had no idea the shifters like this so much, I mused as I sipped my drink. Tristan said their brew is far better, but they have more of this. Not many shifters drink it apparently, Forrest said with a smirk as he tapped his cup against mine. I laughed with him and drank more of it down, eyes glued to Kate twirling around on the dance floor with the other girls and women, as the fast-tempo music continued to play from the musicians sitting atop one of the long tables. The runes on her body gave off a subtle glow still, and I couldn't help but smile the longer I watched her. Finally, she embraced who she was meant to be. I finished my drink, and considered turning in for the night. Alice might be dead, but Cassius was still out there somewhere, along with his army. Before too long, they'd be here, and even with Kate to her full power, I couldn't help but doubt we'd be the victors in that battle. "Where are you going?" Forrest asked, grabbing my arm. "Get some rest while I still can." "Oh no, you are not leaving this hall until you do what you should have done as soon as we got back," he argued. I frowned. "What the bloody hell are you talking about?" "Look," he said and leaned in closer, "I know you and I have sort of had our differences, especially on certain matters regarding the heart." I pursed my lips and tried to leave again, but he wouldn't let me. "You really want to talk about this right now? How you still think you're better for her than I am?" I asked, meaning it to be teasing, but when I glanced toward Kate, I grinned again and my heart swelled. Though I would like to continue to believe that, alas, I was wrong. "I'm sorry, you were what?" I snapped, surprised. "Man, what are you trying to tell me?" Forrest sighed and shrugged. "You love her, Craig. Even not being an empath, I could tell from the way you look at her. We both care for her," he went on when I tried to argue, "and we always will. But what you and Kate have, there's something much deeper there. I won't lie, I am jealous, but I'm not going to try and stand in your way. You love her, and I can tell you without any doubt in my mind, she loves you just as much." I swallowed hard at the sudden lump in my throat. "How do you know for sure?" Forrest grinned as he tapped the side of his head. "How do you think?" "So what, I'm supposed to just walk up to her and do what?" "Let's be honest, Craig, neither one of us knows how this is going to turn out. Or if we're going to live, so do yourself a favor and just tell her the truth, all right?" I nodded slowly, as he finally let me go and I stood. "The truth, right, because that's not hard at all." He smirked into his cup, but I only had eyes for one person as she danced and laughed. I made my way to the edge of the table and caught her gaze as she spun around and around, until she was laughing so hard she was crying. She grasped the hands of a few of the ladies nearby before she hurried toward me, staggering right into my arms like she belonged there. "Hey," she said inside, resting against my side. "You didn't want to dance." "Not much of a dancer." Right, you're too much of my burly protector, she said and nudged me with her elbow. Suddenly, I wasn't so sure if Forrest was right about what he said he felt from her. Something like that. Your protector in forests, I guess. Does that mean you can't have fun for at least one night? I did have fun. I'm fine, really. Don't look like you're having fun. What's with the face? Suddenly, her cheery mood after knowing she'd been so depressed for so long ate at me, and a weird bit of annoyance fluttered up. I ground my teeth and shook my head, backing away. Nothing, it's nothing. I'm going to bed. I'll see you in the morning. I stalked out of the hall, away from the laughter and music, and headed upstairs. I passed Tristan on the way, giving me a curious look, but he didn't stop me. That was good. All I wanted was to get some rest and try to understand what was happening inside my head. Did she really think that I would be able to let everything go that happened the past few weeks? The worry she made me suffer through. But I was just her protector, so what did it matter what I felt? Suddenly, I knew exactly how Brodian must have felt while he watched over Celandine and Malcolm, the two destined to be wed. I wondered if he loved her even then, before she had no choice but to turn to him. Maybe he was right all along, I muttered to myself as I reached my room and kicked out of my boots, chucking them across the room. She doesn't want to be with me. I yanked my shirt over my head and balled it up angrily before throwing it too. I washed my face off with the chilly water in the basin and wiped it on a towel when I heard my door open. Just let it go, man, not in the mood to talk about it more. But Forrest didn't say anything, and I growled in warning. Come on, I just want to sleep, all right? You were right after all, Kate. She leaned against the wall just inside the door as she closed it. The click echoed loudly in my room as she tilted her head, studying me. What was he right about? I tossed the towel back on the cabinet top and shrugged. Nothing. About how you feel for me, she pushed on anyway, and I froze, or how I feel for you. Nothing, it doesn't matter. I know how this is going to turn out. I turned my back on her, hoping she'd leave, but I heard her bare feet pad toward me. I shut my eyes, my hands clenching into fists at my sides as I struggled to push my feelings for her down. But then she wrapped her arms around my waist and rested her cheek between my shoulder blades, and there was no holding anything back now. What are you doing? I whispered roughly. The day you yelled at me, you were right about everything, she said and brushed a gentle kiss against my spine that made me suck in a breath. And I'm sorry for putting you both through all of that worry, but I'm especially sorry to you. I turned in her arms and mine went around her too. What for? You were going through hell, and I pushed you too hard. Not hard enough. She stared intently into my eyes, and all I could do was stare back as the truth came to life in that one look. Craig, I will always love Forrest as a dear friend, but I love you, and I should have told you before I left to go off on my own, but I was scared. I didn't know how you felt, and if I died. I didn't want you to be stuck with a broken heart because of me, and now I don't know what's going to. I leaned down and kissed her, cutting off her rambling. She sank into my chest, and I held her close, thankful that she was still alive for me to hold in the first place. I lifted her off her feet, kissing her the whole time and telling her without words I felt exactly the same. Being with her was just right, and after so many years of feeling lost and alone, I knew with Kate I would never feel like that again. I'm going to guess you love me too, she said with a laugh when we came up for air. How could you tell? I replied softly. Please, for the love of the gods, do not scare me like that ever again, understand? I don't think I can live without you in my life to drive me crazy. I'll do my best, but we both know the future's kind of bleak right now. For now, I agreed. But I am not about to give up the fight. Ditto, she said and stood on her toes to kiss me again, pulling me into a tight embrace. And I'll never doubt us again, swear it. I kissed the top of her head, never wanting to let her go. Good, but you know, if you run, I'll always find my way back to you. She tilted her head back to stare up at me and grinned. Always, Kate. And forever. There was no need for words anymore. She grinned in my arms as we kissed again, the light of the moon flowing gently over us as her runes chased away the shadows in my room. Chapter 19. Craig. Demon King, she murmured, lying beside me in bed. I still can't believe it. Both of you are kings now. I shrugged and pulled her closer. We'd been talking for most of the night, lying in bed and just holding each other close. I caught her up on everything that happened after she left, anything I hadn't told her yet, and she had slowly started opening up about what went on inside her mind while the plague had her in its grasp. I tried not to get angry, but she'd been dragged down so far and nearly lost herself completely because of that bastard. The second I found Cassius, I was going to rip him apart with my bare hands. Yeah, it's odd, I replied. Odd? You're the new Demon King, and all you can say is it's odd, she teased. When you grow up thinking your entire clan hates you, and then suddenly you're the king. And they actually like you being king, and listen to you. Yes, it's very odd, I muttered, covering my face with a hand. I have bodyguards. Now you know how it feels. I gave her a sideways glance. I don't follow you everywhere you go, I tried to argue, and her right brow arched. All right, but I'm not hovering over your shoulder or giving you lectures on what not to do. I trailed off when her other brow joined the first. What? Nothing at all, except you just described how you've been since you found out about our past lives, she said with a shrug. But please continue to complain to me what it's like to have an overbearing bodyguard. I grunted and reached for her with a smirk. Are you complaining about how I watch out for you? No, what are you doing? She burst out laughing as I tickled her sides, and she tried to catch my hands but failed. We cackled, holding each other close before our laughter subsided and dissolved into more kisses that left us both breathless. She smiled at me and snuggled even closer as our laughter filled the room and the moon moved across the night sky. I woke up confused as sunlight landed across my face. When I managed to open my eyes, I grinned at Kate sleeping soundly next to me and kissed her cheek. She smiled in her sleep and rolled over, pulling the covers up over her head. I got out of bed and stretched and yawned. After so many weeks of running on no sleep, I felt fully recharged and ready to take on whatever came at us next. The floor was cold beneath my feet. I moved to the hearth to start a small fire so Kate wouldn't be too cold when she finally woke up. I had just sparked the first flame and shifted the logs around when the room spun around me. I cursed, throwing my arms out to stop myself from face planting into the fire, and hit the floor hard on my side. Craig? Kate murmured behind me, and I heard her jump out of bed. I'm fine, I replied. Just dizzy. I shook my head to try and clear away the sudden fog, but it only got worse. I opened my eyes wide trying to see, but then everything disappeared from my sight and I was falling. I felt Kate's hands on my shoulders, heard her calling out to be, but then there was nothing but darkness and dead silence around me. I spread my arms out wide, trying to feel for something, anything, but all my hands met was air. Kate. I bellowed, and my voice bounced right back at me, louder, and I winced. What the hell is this? For a second, I thought somehow Cassius had gotten inside my mind and was trying to turn me, but then my body was thrown forward, and I landed in a heap on the ground. It trembled beneath me, and the sounds of battle surrounded me. I tasted blood in my mouth and felt a sword held tightly in both hands. Smoke burned my eyes as I sat up, pain ricocheting through my body. Clashing of swords was close by, and suddenly a hand yanked me to my feet. Can you hear me? Forrest yelled to be heard over the surrounding din. Craig. Yeah, I yelled back, and couldn't believe what I was seeing. He was drenched in blood and covered in mud, but it was the field we stood on that I didn't want to believe was real. Broken catapults rested on the ground behind him, and the dead were everywhere, plagued in some of every race alike. Fire spread through the dry grass, and as I spun around muttering no, under my breath the whole time, I saw the shifter castle caved in on one side. The wall had been utterly destroyed, and it too was burning. Black smoke billowed out of the rubble, as plague swarmed everywhere. What's happening? I demanded. Cassius, he attacked with his full force, Forrest said, but it was all I heard before a plagued beast with dripping fangs and black matted fur slammed into us both, sending us rolling across the field. I rushed to get back on my feet as it barreled straight toward me. Instinct kicked in, and I attacked with both swords, bringing it down in seconds when an explosion rocked the field, and I barely managed to stay upright. I searched for the source of it and spied a brilliant blue dragon soaring overhead, chasing a dark, shadowy shape. "Kate," I whispered. Electric blue flames shot from her mouth, but the other dragon dodged the attack and whipped his tail around, catching her in the face. They grappled in midair, and I sprinted toward them as she let out a roar of pain, crashing to the ground. Forrest was close behind me as the other dragon landed and attacked her again. I yelled, ready to dive in, when light burst out of Kate and threw the other dragon across the field. Shadows erupted where he'd landed, and when they cleared, Cassius stood there instead. He was bleeding from a few wounds on his face and arms, but when I drew nearer, it was Kate's injuries that made my gut clench in fear. Kate held the shield in her left hand, but her right was wrapped around her ribs as blood oozed between her fingers. Her face was beaten and bruised, and she was covered in slashes. Her gaze shifted to mine, and the look of defeat hit me hard. "No," I whispered, sprinting toward her. This wasn't real, it couldn't be real. But Cassius was bellowing as he charged toward her, sword in hand alight with black flames. She raised her shield to defend against the attack, but was so weak already, and the hit forced her back a few steps. I was so close when more plagues swarmed around me and Forrest, stopping us from getting to her. I barely managed to keep sight of them as they fought while I tried to shove my way through the plague surrounding us. Kate lost ground quickly, and when Cassius slashed his sword toward her again, I felt the air leave my lungs and my heart shattered. "No, no." Her mouth gaped open in shock as she stared down at her chest. The shield meant to save her was broken in two, the second half lying on the ground at her feet. Blood gushed from the wound, and she sank to her knees as Cassius bore down on her. I slashed and stabbed at Plagued as Forrest cursed behind me. We had to get to her. Had to save her. But then his arm pulled back, and he plunged the sword straight through her chest. She toppled over, and he yanked it free. I willed for her to get up, to keep fighting, but she didn't move again. "Kate." I bellowed and managed to break free of the Plagued, charging in a blind fury right for Cassius. I was going to tear him apart, destroy him, when something slammed into my chest and I staggered to a stop. My swords fell from my suddenly numb hands, and I glanced down, tasting more blood in my mouth. His blade protruded from my chest. I grimaced, falling to my knees and struggling to breathe. Forrest rushed past me, and I saw him go for Cassius, but the bastard was glowing now, covered in red runes, mimicking those on Kate's body. He easily grabbed Forrest's neck with one hand and lifted him off his feet. With his gaze locked onto mine, he squeezed, and I heard bones snap as Forrest's body went limp in his arms. I wanted to scream at him, to get up and avenge them both, but I couldn't move. My breaths were ragged and hollow sounding. The last thing I saw before my eyes closed was Cassius stalking toward me, whistling as he tossed Forrest's body aside like trash. He crouched in front of me, smirking as he grabbed the hilt of his sword. "Accept your defeat," he whispered. "That's all you'll ever know. Failure and defeat." He tore the sword in my chest, and everything went dark. I was falling again, down and down into nothingness. Part of me wondered if I would see Kate and Forrest whenever I got to where I was going. But the second I hit something hard again, I knew this was wrong. I tasted blood in my mouth, felt the swords in my hands, and my eyes shot open to see the fighting happening all around me again. Forrest was there, and I gulped as I realized what was about to happen. I was going to have to watch us all die again and again and again.
Chapter 20. Forrest. Even before I heard Kate yell for help, I knew something was wrong with Craig. I felt his anger and fear slam me back into my bed as I tried to get up. After taking a few deep breaths, I managed to drag myself up and rush down the hall to his room. "Craig." I threw the door open, and Kate was on the floor, Craig's head in her lap, as she shook his shoulders. "He won't wake up," she told me, holding back tears. "I don't know what happened. He was just starting a fire, and then he just keeled over. What's happening to him?" Whatever's happening, he's in pain, I grunted as another wave of anger struck me. Together, we got him up onto the bed as Lucy and Luca appeared in the doorway. They rushed in to help, Lucy laying her head on Craig's forehead. She closed her eyes, whispering something under her breath when I gasped for air and fell back against the wall, clutching my chest. "Forrest?" Kate rushed to me, holding me up as I struggled to breathe. "What? What's wrong?" Words wouldn't come, and all I could do was try to breathe through the immense pain that made me feel like I'd been stabbed through the chest. "Vision," I murmured. "I think he's having a vision." "Then why won't he open his eyes?" Kate asked. "I don't know, but whatever he's seeing, it's not good." I needed to break into his mind and see if I could pull him out somehow. Whatever Craig saw was worse, far worse than anything we'd seen yet on this journey. He growled fiercely on the bed, and we all watched, hoping he'd open his eyes. They remained firmly shut, and Kate squeezed his hand, begging for him to wake up. He shifted, and I thought he was coming to, but then he thrashed and bellowed in pain. It took all of us to hold him down and stop him from hurting himself. "Ropes!" I yelled to whoever else was at the door. "We need rope." Kate and I pinned his shoulders while Luca and Lucy grabbed hold of his legs, but whatever had hold of him made him lash out, and he was damn stronger than before. He nearly threw us all to the floor before Tristan and Grayson rushed in carrying chains. "Thought this might work better," Tristan explained at my curious look. As gently as we could, we chained Craig down as he continued to strain and snarl as if he'd gone completely mad. "What do we do?" Kate whispered. "Forrest?" I leaned closer and pressed my hand to his forehead the best I could, searching for a way in. I can feel his emotions, like path into his mind, but I can't find a way to get to him. Kate hurried around, so she stood on the same side of the bed as me and took my hand in hers. "Let me take care of that." Warmth shot from her hand into mine as the runes on her body burned brilliant blue, lighting the room. "No," Lucy said worriedly. "No, this is too dangerous." "We don't have a choice," Kate argued. "We have to get him back. I have to get him back. If Cassius attacks and we don't have Craig here, we're doomed anyway, right?" She said it lightly, but the dark truth of her words made everyone shift and frown. She swallowed hard as we exchanged one final look before I told her to clear her mind the best she could, and just think of Craig. I did the same, keeping my hand to his forehead and latched onto the swirling storm of his raw hate. The second I had hold of it, I felt my mind yanked away from my mind, and Kate's grip on my hand tightened painfully. I was falling through nothing, and when I landed, it took a few seconds to understand what was happening. A battle was happening around us. We stood in the middle of the field, outside the castle in Tirolf, as chaos surrounded us. There was screaming and the cries of dying men and women, dragons roaring and plagued everywhere. What is this?" Kate whispered, spinning around as she let go of my hand. "Where are we?" "A vision," I replied. "This must be what he's seeing." No wonder he was thrashing around in his sleep. I squinted, peering through the mass of bodies in search for Craig. A plague sprinted toward us and I braced for an attack, yelling a warning to Kate, but it passed right through us both. We weren't really here, just visitors. "No." I heard Craig bellow and we both whipped around. Kate cursed, but the sight before me froze me to the spot. Kate, a different Kate, stood across the field with Cassius before her. From the amount of blood dripping down her body, and the victorious look on that bastard's face, he had just killed her. I finally spotted Craig and stepped back in shock to see a sword jutting out of his chest. Another version of me was sprinting toward Cassius, but in a few horrible seconds, I watched that version of myself get killed. Kate and I watched, stunned into silence, as Cassius moved across the field and finished Craig off. "What? No," Kate whispered, shaking her head. "No, this can't be right, can it?" I didn't know what to say, but before anything came out of my mouth, the world spun around us, and we landed right back where we started, but further back into the battle. I heard myself yelling for Craig and saw me helping him up, swords in his hands, and driving back into the fight as Kate and Cassius battled overhead. "It's a loop," I whispered, watching it play out all over again, all the way to the very end. He's stuck in a damn loop. We have to break him out of it. How do we do that? She asked, already hurrying to catch up to Craig. I was right behind her, watching him go through the motions. Half of me hoped it wasn't the real Craig, and he was somehow just a witness in all of this too, but as the sword plunged into his chest again, Kate and I gasping in shock and cursing, I heard him mutter, "Damn it, enough." "Craig," I yelled right in his ear. He flinched, but it wasn't enough to pull him from his vision. "Craig, come on," I yelled louder, grabbing hold of his shoulders, but either he couldn't feel me or I wasn't actually reaching him. The scenario played out a second time, and when he reset, Kate and I were right there when he got up with the other me by his side. I stood right in front of him, but he merely walked around me without even seeming to think about it. "It's not working," Kate snapped, going so far as to smack him across the face. He flinched at the hit and blinked confused, staring around. The rest of the vision seemed to slow around us, but then it sped right back up again, and he kept on going. Kate looked at me, but I had no idea what else to suggest, except the one thing that might be enough. "Remind him," I told her as we stayed right beside him through the whole fight. "You have to remind him." "About what?" "About you, both of you, together. He's trying to get to you, to save you, Kate. Remind him that you're not that Kate, that none of this has happened yet." While we'd been talking, the other Kate had been slashed, and the sword had just plunged itself into Craig's chest. He sank to his knees, spitting curses as Kate knelt in front of him. She held his face in her hands and kissed him. Cassius kept moving, as did the rest of the fight, and I hung my head thinking it wasn't working, but then the vision came to an abrupt halt, just as the other Forrest was lifted off the ground by his throat. Kate pulled back slowly, narrowed eyes watching Craig closely, before his arms wrapped around her and dragged her to his chest, kissing her again and hugging her. "Kate, you're alive, thank the gods," he whispered over and over again. She hugged him back, and I patted his shoulder. He turned to look up at me, grabbing my hand. "Way to scare the piss out of us, man." He climbed to his feet, and we all stared at the sword that laid on the ground at his feet, the one that had just moments ago been jutting out of his chest. "Do you have any idea how many times I've watched you both die?" he whispered. His gaze lingered on the dead Kate across the field, and his face paled. He shook, and we turned him away. "How long have I been stuck in here?" "Wait, are you two stuck in here too?" No, I don't think so," I replied. "And not long, 20 minutes or so." "That's it." He shuddered, and Kate's hold on his hand tightened. "Sorry, I expected to have a vision the closer we got to the end of this mess, but nothing like this." Kate blanched, staring around the field. "You think this will really happen?" she whispered. "No, maybe," he said quietly. "I don't know, but if not exactly like this, I think this vision has told me something vital. We're missing whatever the key is to stopping Cassius, to stopping all of this." "But what?" I asked, slowly moving around. "I don't know. I've watched it all happen again and again and again, and I can't understand what happens. Kate has the shield, but he destroys it and kills us all. It's like our strength just disappears." "Craig?" I asked when he stopped talking. He tapped my shoulder, and I turned around to see what he was pointing at that had him and Kate transfixed. 3 figures stood across the way, a strange wind rustling their hair and clothes, though none blew across the field. 3 figures who beckoned to us, and clearly did not belong here. Together, the 3 of us marched across the field, stepping around and over dead bodies, past Cassius still holding me by the throat, and the dead body of Kate I quickly averted my gaze from. We stopped a few feet short of the others, stopping directly in front of the past lives we each had. Brodian, Celandine, and Malcolm. Each smiled softly at us as Celandine stepped away from the others. "The time for the final battle is upon you," she said. "And this?" Kate spread her arms wide. "This is what happens?" "It's one of many possible outcomes," Brodian replied in his deep growl of a voice, "but the most likely if you do not correct a mistake we made so long ago." "I don't understand," I said slowly. "What mistake?" "You did everything you could to stop all of this. What did you not do?" Malcolm sighed as he reached out and rested a heavy hand on my shoulder. It's more of something we should not have done. The realms should never have been divided. In trying to protect the races, give them a chance to defend themselves, we made them weaker, made them nearly defenseless against this plague. You did it to try and protect them, I argued. Yes, and in doing so, we failed them. Wait, Kate mumbled quietly, you're saying you want us to put the realms back together? The three nodded in unison. It is the only way, Celandine assured us. The only way to give you enough strength and power from all the realms to defeat the darkness before it consumes everything in its path. How the bloody hell are we going to do that? Craig growled. Brodian smirked, and the look was nearly identical. Carefully, but to do so, you'll need to pull on the original power that split them in the first place. That of the Vindicar that runs through all of you, and the one who dwells within the darkness. Cassius? Kate snapped. We need his blood? You're joking, right? Sadly, no. Celandine stared proudly at Kate as she cupped her cheek. You have come far, Catherine, and proven yourself a true Vindicar. Have faith and you will see this through. And this future here, Craig muttered, we can avoid it? None of us will die. I'm afraid that is up to you in the end, Malcolm told us. But hope is your strongest weapon. Never forget that. I wanted to ask more questions, figure out how to ensure none of us died, but then everything swirled around us, and I gasped as I came to back in Craig's room, Kate beside me. Guys? Craig muttered, and I glanced down to see him staring at the chain curiously. Kate and I quickly freed him and helped him sit up. He was slow to move, but once we got him on his feet, and he hugged Kate close, I sensed his mind clearing. What happened? Lucy asked urgently. But it wasn't her I focused on. Out in the corridor, people were rushing around and bells rang out. Malcolm's talk of hope disappeared in a second as I realized what was happening. Cassius and his army, they were here. Were we ready to fight them? Ready to do what had to be done to bring this all to an end? Mama Lucy, Kate said as she took Lucy's hand, I need your help. What are you thinking? Craig asked. I'm thinking we need a trap for Cassius, she told us. Time to trick him for once before we end him for good.
Chapter 21. Kate. In all the times I'd seen Celandine dressed and ready for battle, never did I picture myself in the exact same clothes and leather armor with bits of chain mail. It was surreal, but here I was with Craig and Forrest at my sides, all three of us armed and ready for this final fight. The real shield hummed with power as I held it steady in my left hand, a sword in my right. Not the executioner blade, but I knew now the weapon didn't matter. The only thing that did was the person wielding this shield, and the two by her side. The three of us, we were the true weapon, and were ready to face whatever befell us. The trap was set, and though I clung to the hope that it would work, doubts rose in my mind as the minutes ticked by. I expected to be afraid, after witnessing what could be my death several times over, but there was no fear. Not anymore. Just the knowledge of what we had to accomplish, if we were to save the realms. Steps echoed behind us, climbing up to the top of the wall where we waited. It's ready, Mama Lucy whispered behind me. And everyone's in position? Craig growled quietly. Just waiting for the signal. When the first scouts arrived that morning, they'd spotted the first few troops appearing near where the first camp had been. We didn't have long to come up with a plan, but we managed. I had to admit, I was impressed, but there'd been no time to run through it and make sure there were no kinks to work out. A dull rumble met my ears, then another, and I realized what it was, the sound sending a chill down my spine. Drums. The army of plagued was coming. I cursed under my breath, and Forrest and Craig both shifted closer so their arms brushed against mine. No words were needed, not anymore. We were in this together. Whether the plan worked or not, I would fight until my last breath to try and save them and everyone else. The drums grew louder, and I stepped closer to the edge of the wall. At the front gates, we might have had a better view of the army amassing at the river, but from our position to the south, all we could do was listen. Behind me, wings rustled as the dragons impatiently waited for their time to move in. Tristan, his shifters, the elves with Drake, and the rest of the demons awaited Cassius and his army in the courtyard and along the outer wall. The worst part of this entire plan was the waiting for the right moment to attack. Waiting and listening as others fought before we could move in. "Where is she?" I heard Cassius bellow loudly, and I froze. "Where's your precious Vindicar now? Has she abandoned you? Left you to die?" I growled, but Craig rested his hand on my army. "Easy," he whispered. "Don't." I nodded, but it didn't make it any easier to listen to him yell as Tristan called back. "Take your army and go, Cassius. You are not welcome here, and if you attack, your victory will not be an easy one." "For you, perhaps," he replied. "You could join me, Tristan, join me and I will make it worth your while." I heard the catapults cranking back and Tristan howled. The sound was picked up by the rest of his army, and the demons roared alongside them as the elves blew their horns low and long as they readied for the attack. Any second now, it would be beginning, any second. The yelling started as the plague charged the wall, and swords soon clashed against swords while something heavy battered against the gate. I counted out the seconds under my breath, then the minutes, until another horn blew, 3 short bursts followed by 1 long. I nodded to Forrest and Craig, then took a deep breath and shifted, letting my dragon free. I soared high up into the clouds, spreading my wings wide. I circled back around and spied where I needed to land. The plagued army was across the field, focusing all their attention on the wall, and didn't even notice me. But it wasn't them I wanted. It was Cassius. I roared loudly, drawing his evil gaze, and he smirked at the sight of me alone. "Come on, you bastard," I thought as I waited for him to make his next move. "Come and get me." He raised his arm and yelled for the plagued unit protecting their leader to turn and charge toward me. But it was far more than I anticipated, and cursed quietly in my head. We'd hoped for far fewer plagued, but this would have to work. I needed him to get just a bit closer, just a bit closer. The second I felt him pass over the rune burnt into the ground at his feet, I roared a second time and was answered in kind by the rest waiting behind the wall. "You think you can challenge me?" Cassius declared, swinging his sword casually at his side. "You may have killed Alice, but he was weak. You, my dear sweet Catherine, will die a slow and painful death for all the trouble you've put me through." I smirked, still in dragon form, as he moved in closer. I anticipated his move, and he snapped his fingers. Though I knew it was coming, it still hurt like hell to be forced out of my dragon form. I sank to my knees as I sucked in a sharp breath. He moved in closer, but paused when I started to cackle, lifting my head to meet his confused gaze. "You're not very original, you know that?" I muttered. He opened his mouth when a downdraft of air made him look up, confused. 10 dragons broke through the heavy cloud cover, thanks to Mama Lucy and her witches. Before Cassius could call for an attack, they shot fire from their mouths, flying in a large circle that surrounded me, Cassius, and the plagued he dragged away from his main army. The flames stretched high above us, blocking out any view of the rest of the field. He didn't seem concerned at all, as he bellowed for more soldiers. Several heard him, and another unit peeled away from the main force. I held my breath as they charged forward, swords at the ready. But the second they touched the flames, they were consumed and died screaming in agony. What did you do?" he raged at her. "This is impossible." "No, actually it's not. And neither is this." I closed my eyes for a brief second and reached out for the connection between me, Craig, and Forrest. A warmth rushed through me, and when Cassius cursed louder, I opened my eyes, feeling their presence behind me. "It's over, Cassius. If you surrender now, I'll make your death swift." "You think this is enough to stop me?" he snarled. "A little fire, and the 3 of you. I am thousands of years old. I am older than time itself." His words caught me off guard, and I shifted back, confused. What is he talking about? I whispered to Craig and Forrest. But then Cassius was cackling again, as his eyes burned with a red flame. Something was wrong, but it was too late to change the plan now. Right on time, more figures appeared in the circle of flames, Mama Lucy, Grayson and all the others willing to risk everything for this moment. Luca, Nora and more demons stood, ready to protect them as they spread out around us, taking up their places along the rune on the ground. Cassius watched them closely, then his gaze darted to his feet. His eyes narrowed, and a high-pitched shriek issued from his mouth. "Kill them! Kill them all!" Cassius charged right for me, but I was ready for him. I brought the shield up to block his first attack as Craig and Forrest covered my sides, taking out plague that came at us. Mama Lucy led the chant needed to start the incantation that would bring the realms together, just like the one used to break them apart so many centuries ago. The only problem was, to do the chant, they had to fall into a trance and were completely vulnerable, and the second they finished, we had to spill Cassius' blood, enough to finish the job. All around me was chaos, but I couldn't spare a second to look. Cassius' attacks were quick, and I could barely get my shield up every time to block them. A flash of that sword breaking my shield hit me hard, but then I felt a sudden rush of strength and felt Forrest and Craig fighting right there alongside me. I lunged forward, throwing Cassius off balance, and finally got him on the defensive. My sword sailed through the air in the graceful arcs I'd learned long ago from my dad. Cassius, it seemed, had since forgotten how to fight, and I kept him busy. I moved in too fast to try and press the attack, as the air became heavily charged with the power being called on, and he swiped my legs out from under me with a kick. I landed and rolled to avoid the blade he brought down, right where my head would have been. He kicked me hard in the hip, and I grunted in pain, raising my shield to try and fend off his constant attack. Each hit threatened to drag my only protection away. Abruptly he yelled in pain, and I saw him sail through the other plague behind him. Craig reached down and hoisted me back to my feet, his face bloodied already, Forrest beside him bearing a black eye. I glanced around and spied several of the others had fallen, but the chant was still going strong. "How much longer?" I asked as Cassius found his feet, but didn't come charging after us just yet. "Forrest?" "I don't know," he said quietly. "We have to just keep him busy." "What the hell do you think I've been doing?" I muttered, and both of them smirked. But then Forrest's eyes widened and he cursed, throwing himself at me and Craig as we hit the ground. The blast of black fire shot over us, but it caught Forrest and he grunted in pain. I searched around, expecting to see Cassius in his dragon form, but he was still standing there and grinned darkly as he sucked in a deep breath to hit us again. "Down!" I yelled and tried to get behind the shield and protect Craig and Forrest. The blast was too strong, and we were thrown backward into the others that were fighting. My ears rang and I struggled to get back up, my arms and legs shaking. Forrest lay not too far from me, but his eyes were shut. His chest rose and fell at least, but he was unconscious. "Kate," I heard Craig growl, but he wasn't looking at me. I shifted my gaze, wincing with each painful bit of movement, and saw Cassius move to the wall of fire we'd created to keep the rest of his army from joining in the fight. "No," I whispered the second I realized what he was about to do. I pushed to my feet, forcing my limbs to work and charged toward him. Craig yelled at me to wait, but all I could see was him holding out his hand to the fire as runes on his body glowed a fierce red. It blinded me before it shot out of his body and attacked the flames. Red and black flames erupted up the wall, and with an ear-splitting crack, they split the flames created to keep the plagued out and Cassius in. The flames collapsed like a waterfall before they hit the ground, and an opening appeared. Just on the other side, plagued waited to come to the aid of their master. Cassius cackled as he turned back around to stare intently at me. "Now this ends." I gripped my sword tighter in my hand and snarled at him, my roar spurring on the other fighters around us. Their resounding cries drove me forward, and I attacked with everything I had left to give. Cassius barely met my first few blows, aiming for his neck. We needed his blood spilled, and I just hoped if I did it too soon, it would still be enough to destroy him. But he quickly gained the upper hand again, driving me back as he locked his sword against my shield. He seethed and met over the top of it, until Craig's fist connected with the side of his face and sent him reeling backward. Craig, bleeding and walking with a horrible limp, nodded at me fiercely. Cassius shook out his head from the hit when another smoked his head from behind and Forrest was there, spitting out a mouthful of blood, every step making him cringe in pain. "Why won't you just die?" Cassius ranted as he came for us all again. Behind me, screams of witches dying had me forgetting about anything else except making this work. More plague rushed in, swarming around us, and my last sliver of hope clung on for dear life as the truth hit me hard. We were going to die. This was it, this was the end of us all. "Dares do not give up," Celandine's voice whispered in my mind. "Not now, not ever." I dug deep, pulling on every last bit of power that existed within me, but it wasn't enough, not alone. We had to give the witches their chance, needed just those few more moments. Not even sure what I was doing, I threw my sword to the ground and grabbed hold of the shield with my free hand. It burst to life with a deep blue hue that stopped Cassius in his tracks. Forrest and Craig moved in closer to my sides without a word. The moment each laid a hand on my shoulder, the power intensified and shot outward. It pushed back the plagued and with each pulse, moved further out, driving the enemy into the fire that would consume them. My body shook, and I grit my teeth, fighting to hold on. Blood dripped from my nose, and I felt it warm against my ears, but I didn't pull back, didn't dare stop yet. "You will not win," Cassius raged, planting his feet and not letting the light shove him aside. "I will rule over everything. I will control the realms." Just when I felt myself start to break down, Mama Lucy called out behind us, "Now?" I let out a battle cry as I pushed forward, shoving the shield ahead of me as the three of us moved as one. He raised his arm, ready to bring that sword down on us with glee, when something struck him from behind, and he grunted in annoyance. Luca stepped out from behind him, holding a bloodied dagger in his hands. "That?" Cassius grunted harshly in amusement. "That is what you plan to do to me? Stab me in the back? That cannot kill me." "Never said it was going to," Luca snapped. Then with a yell, Luca drove the bloody dagger into the ground, right through the center of the rune. The burnt ground flared to life as blue light flooded it before it burst outward, encompassing all of us. We hit the ground and I kept my head ducked down, as Forrest and Craig remained at my sides. We held tightly to each other, waiting to see if it worked or not. I had no idea what to expect, or what bringing the realms together would actually mean, but when it felt like we were spinning around faster and faster before we slammed into something harder, I worried the realms were going to implode instead. It sounded like a tornado whipped around us, as more screams of panic filled the air. I carefully lifted my head, watching as the plagued were dragged off and thrown into nothingness. Then everything came to a sudden halt, and we sat up, staring around as we tried to get our bearings. Where before I'd noticed a shimmering beyond the river marking the edge of the realm, now there were mountains, the same ones that the castle in Gregornath backed up to. I whipped around the other direction, and saw hints of Shaper Mount peaks that marked the edge of Boshan. "We did it," I whispered on a breath. "We did it." "No," Cassius grunted nearby, and we hurried to find our feet. What did you do?" "We reversed the magic you used to separate the powers of these realms," Mama Lucy informed him, and I was thankful to see her alive after the fight. More and more people stepped forward, until Cassius was surrounded by those who survived his attack. Mama Lucy continued, "We are together again, and you? You have nothing." He snarled as he charged toward her, but I stepped in front to block her with the shield. The second his fist connected with it, he was thrown backward and landed hard on his back. With Craig and Forrest, I moved in closer, glaring down at him fiercely as the power that I'd grown used to intensified tenfold. Power truly did run through the realms, and now that they were joined, the darkness didn't stand a chance. "Cassius Dara," I said loudly as I stood over his body, "I hereby sentence you to death for treason and the attempt to destroy the races." He spat at me, and for a split second his eyes flared red again. "You do not know what you unleash," he warned. "You think I was the only one? You will burn, Vindikar, you will all burn." The last word was barely out of his mouth before I brought the shield down on his chest. He gasped in shock and pain before his body went limp and disintegrated into ashes that blew away on the wind. I stepped back, satisfied that it was finally over, but Forrest cursed, and suddenly he and Craig were dragging me back as the crowd around us gasped and murmured. A dark, shadowy outline remained where Cassius' body had laid. As we watched, it swirled itself together, taking on another form, a figure with no face and only two red burning eyes. "What the hell is that?" I muttered. "That," the figure spoke with a deep growling voice, "is me being freed from a 2,000-year-old prison. All thanks to you." "What?" It reached out a hand for me, and I shivered as its fingertips barely brushed my cheek. My gut roiled at the stench of evil wafting off him, and I recoiled, falling back into Craig's arms as he and Forrest shoved me protectively behind them. "Don't worry, I have much work to do before I am ready for another fight." Those red eyes swiveled around. "And this time, I'm afraid you won't be so lucky." It snapped its fingers and was gone. I heard Craig and Forrest whispering to each other, but nothing they said reached me. It appeared the war wasn't over after all. It was only just beginning.
Chapter 22. Forrest. I stood in the courtyard, watching as the remainder of the destroyed wall was brought down in the courtyard, in order to be completely rebuilt. Since the realms were thrown back together, I'd spent most of my time in Gregornath, fixing what could be fixed and doing my best to recover those we lost in the fighting. For the first few days we had more burials than I could count, but every realm was the same. Well, every territory. We were all back to one realm, and it was making life much easier. Communications and trade were getting back to what they must have been like before they'd been split in the first place. I wiped my arm over my forehead, brushing away the sweat and dirt from working out in the sun all day long. I turned and spied the stonemasons at work, crafting a statue of Kadun to be erected in the courtyard, in memory of my father. "See, being king has its perks after all," a familiar voice said behind me. "Speaking from experience?" I asked. Craig approached, clasping my arm and pulling me into a one-armed hug. I figured the castle could use a facelift, as well as everything else. It was halfway destroyed, so why not? "It's coming along," Craig agreed. "How are things in Boshan?" He shrugged, and we walked to stand in the shade of the new wall. "Same as here. Rebuilding, restructuring, planting fields, trying to get life back to normal. Well, better than normal, I guess." "You'll be a much better king than your father was," I assured him. "I hope so." We stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching dragons fly freely overhead, enjoying the peace killing Cassius had bought us all. At least for now. I crossed my arms, thinking back to that day and the shadow that remained behind. What had truly been behind the entire war in the first place? Cassius had just been a pawn, just like everyone else. When he and Zohar thought they created the darkness to control, they had in fact released a darkness that had been buried away for thousands and thousands of years. "How is she?" I asked quietly. "You don't have to ask," he replied softly. "But since you asked, she's dealing." "And the nightmares?" He growled. "Not as frequent as before, but still there." He planted his hands on his hips and paced around a bit. "I wanted to know if you would be available in about a month to travel to Boshan?" "Oh. What for?" "Thought we weren't meeting with the council for another 2. "This has nothing to do with the council." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny silver band with sapphires that glinted off it in the sunlight. "This has something to do letting Kate know exactly how I feel, and not giving her a chance to put it off." I grinned and gave him a brotherly smack on the shoulder. "A wedding would do all of our people some good, I think." "Gods, I hope so," he mumbled. "Forrest." "Hey." Kate called out, waving her hand over her head. Craig quickly tucked the ring back in his pocket with a wink at me. She ran forward, and I caught her in a tight hug as she kissed my cheek. "Everything's looking incredible. Gregornath is certainly going to be impressive once it's all said and done." "I hope so," I agreed. "Craig says everything is going well at Boshan?" "It is, and Lucis working with the coven to figure out about the shadow with the red eyes." Her smile faltered for a few seconds as she stared off into the distance. "Nothing yet." "We'll figure it out," I promised. "In time," she whispered. Sorry, trying not to be all doom and gloom, but I hoped after offing Cassius this would all be over and I would go back to normal. I smiled gently as Craig rolled his eyes. You're a derricate, I told her, one of the last. I don't think normal was ever going to be in the cards for you. And don't worry, we'll face this darkness together, and with the realms back together we'll have a fighting chance. She smiled, but I knew she didn't believe me. Ready to take a break? Why don't we catch up over dinner? We'll catch up, I told her, and she headed inside as Craig and I lagged behind. Not much for hope at the moment. I told you, it's been rough. I know she's blaming herself. For what? Not seeing it, I guess, he said. I don't know, but she needs something good in her life. She has something good. She's got you, I reminded him. And you, he said, nudging my arm. Guess we should get in there before she comes back out looking for us. Together we headed inside, and all the while I ignored the strange sensation that I was being watched from the shadows. At the door I paused and glanced back, swearing I caught a flicker of red eyes until I blinked they were gone. Whatever this new enemy was, I would ensure we destroyed it before it hurt any more of my people.
Chapter 23. Craig. The ring was burning in my pocket as I climbed upstairs to the newest wing of the new demon castle, complete with chambers fashioned to suit the new demon king and his future wife. If she said yes, of course. In the days since that final battle, Kate and I had spent nearly all our time together, working with Forrest when we could, and dealing with my affairs in Boshan. She returned to Luce's home several times to check on the witches. There had been meetings with the council to try and come up with a plan to combat this new threat. But without any information, we were left to simply brace for whatever came next. I'd nearly lost Kate fighting against the plague and Cassius. I was not going to waste any time in moving our lives forward. With Forrest giving me his blessing, there was no other reason for me to wait. I opened the door to the outer chamber and spied Kate out on the balcony, staring up at the moon and the stars in the sky. Her hair hung loosely over her shoulders, and for the first time since coming here, she was wearing a gown fit for her new position in this world. You look pretty stunning in that, I said as I wrapped my arms around her waist, kissing her cheek. She leaned back into me with a sigh. I don't know, I thought the leather armor and chainmail was more fitting. Getting in fights every other day, dresses might only get in the way. You wear whatever you want, I said with a chuckle. I don't care. As long as you're happy. I'm here with you. She tilted her head back and kissed me softly. And Boshan is coming back to life, so is Gregornath. Forrest told me the Dara lands have been completely purged and soon I can go back there and see what's left. What are you going to do with the land? I'm not sure yet. Wasn't sure if you wanted me around all the time. I smirked against her shoulder and couldn't wait any longer. Kate, I have no idea what the future is going to hold. Funny, since you get visions, she teased. All right, smartass, I said as she laughed. I spun her around so she faced me and tucked her hair behind her ears. My point is, I love you, Catherine, and I have a proposition for you. She frowned as I reached into my pocket and pulled out the ring I'd been carrying around for days. When I held it up for her to see, she blinked furiously, and I spied the glimmer of tears in her eyes. Is that what I think it is?" she whispered. "Yes, and I think you already know what I'm going to ask." I gently took her left hand and held the ring near her finger. "I'm not a fool, and my being the Demon King and you being the Vindicar is not going to make this a normal relationship, but I love you, and I want to make this official before we're sucked into another war," she offered. I took a deep breath to try and steady my nerves. "Yeah, something like that. So." She made me wait at least a minute, and I swear she did it on purpose before a smile spread across her face and she nodded eagerly. Yes. I slipped the ring onto her finger and wrapped her up in a hug, kissing her. This peace of ours might not last long, but I prayed it would be long enough to give Kate the wedding she deserved and a few months, maybe even years of happiness before all hell came crashing down around us again. We stayed out on the balcony, talking about our future, long into the night, our hands clasped securely together between us. This was not how I saw this adventure ending, but then again, this was far from over. Now, I was just getting started.
Chapter 24. Kate. 6 months later. I spun my new wedding ring around and around on my finger after I dismounted my black mare and led her into the stable. It had been completed just a few weeks ago, and I was still getting used to my new life. The Dara lands were back in my control, as was the old fortress and surrounding buildings. I had a staff, which I was certainly not used to, and Forrest and Craig had given aid to any wishing to start their lives over under my rule. Because that's what I expected out of all of this. Not a queen. I was technically a queen as well as the Vindikar and last Dara. Or we thought I was the last Dara. Once the wedding happened, dragons started showing up at Boshan, Daras all of them. They'd been hiding out in the human world, and as soon as they realized what happened, started to come back home where they belonged. I'd been spending so much of my time helping them settle into their new lives back amongst their own kin. I'd almost let myself believe this happy life we had going could remain exactly how it was. I married the guy they first loved, had my other best friend alive and well, and things were looking up. But for some reason tonight, as I entered the fortress, nodding absently at my guards near the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Craig had to remain behind in Boshan for another week while he discussed the idea of a large army, one combined of all the races and ruled over by a special council. So far, it sounded as if everything was working out well enough. I climbed up to my chambers and kicked out of my boots as I let my hair down, running my fingers through it. Mama Lucy was coming to visit tomorrow, bringing with her what she said was the only bit of information she could find about this red-eyed shadow. I was anxious now, needing to make a plan to get ready for the next war one knew was coming. I opened the balcony doors and walked out, leaning on the railing as I stared out into the distance. Fresh farm fields stretched as far as I could see to the trees, and up drifted the soft laughter and chatter of those below in the small village that was slowly being created out here. I heard shuffling behind me and smiled. "I knew you wouldn't be able to stay away for long," I said, smiling as the steps moved closer. "Craig?" "Sorry, love," a rough voice replied that was not Craig. I whipped around and stared wide-eyed at the shadow figure standing just yards from me, eyes flaring bright red with living flames. What are you doing here?" "I'm afraid your husband isn't going to be seeing you for quite some time." I opened my mouth to scream for aid, even as the runes burst to life on my body, ready to fight, but then he charged forward and there was nothing but shadows and silence.
I hope you've enjoyed this Kit Bladegrave book. Don't forget to subscribe and to ring the bell to be notified of new releases.